So, next slide. Yeah. So again, welcome to this webinar. This is our second webinar. Our first webinar is very successful. As of the moment, ay meron na po siyang 4,200 views both in Zoom and YouTube. And I'm back. I am again your host for today. I am Catherine Ann T. Castillo Israel. You can call me Ma'am Catsy. And yung pong nasa picture na yan, hindi ko po yan tita, ako po yan. Okay? And baka nagtataka kayo kasi medyo na iba ang aking tsura. Siyempre humaba na ang aking buhok dahil sa ating pagko-quarantine. Okay? And kung mapapansin nyo, ito pa rin ang aking suot, kagaya ng last time. Naiba lang yung background ko, no? Pero meron pang isang naiba sa akin. So para sa makakahula kung ano yung naiba sa akin ay bibigyan ko ng premyo. Ayan, $100. Sino po ang makakahula? Paki-type sa chat box. Pero na-disable ang ating chat box. Kaya joke lang po yun, wala po talaga akong po premyo. Ang sagot po sa aking tanong ay lipstick. Dahil last time ay naka-fuchsia lipstick ako, ngayon ay red. Dahil nahirapan po akong mag-pronounce at mag-spell ng fuchsia, kaya ginawa ko na lang red. Anyway, kaya ko sinasabi ang mga to, no? Bakit nga ba? Dahil ang topic natin ngayon ay assessment. So sa ginagawa ko ngayon, kayo pag nagturo kayo, hindi nyo rin alam kung anong magiging reaksyon ng mga estudyante nyo habang kayo'y salita ng salita sa harap. No? Hindi natin maintindihan kung natatawa ba sila, nakokornian ba sila sa sinasabi natin, naiintindihan pa nila. Kaya ngayon, ang ating webinar ay about assessment, na para malaman natin kung effective ba tayo sa ating pagtuturo. Yan. Kaya meron po kaming mga inimbitahan, 5 po sila. No? 5 po sila na mga teachers din, kagaya natin. Brief background lang sa kanilang 5. No? So ito pong grupong ito, sila po ay mga dati naming colleagues sa Institute of Chemistry. Nagtuturo po kami noon nung kabataan namin at naging malalapit na magkaibigan. Sila po ay ilan sa mga napunta sa Amerika para mag-aral. No? At pagkatapos nila mag-aral ay pinalad sila na magkaroon ng pare-parehong kapalaran bilang maging guro, no? ng kolehiyo. At sila ngayon ay lahat ay nagtuturo ng college chemistry. And nung nagkaroon ng pandemya, no, last term, ay napilitan sila lahat na mag-shift to remote learning. At ang nangyari, nagkaroon sila ng support group, sila nagkaroon sila ng grupo na nagdi-discuss sila, no, ng kanilang mga experiences and best practices. So nabuo po silang 5. And ngayon, hindi lang po sa among themselves sila mag-share, but also sa atin, this is also their way to give back, no, to the Filipino teachers. Kaya po, kami ay nagpapasalamat at pinaunlakan nila kaming KKP at PhilSci Hub. Okay, so bago tayo magsimula, meron lang konting opening remarks ang ating presidente ng Kapisanang Kimika ng Pilipinas, si Professor Joseph Carmelo Quezon Pascual. Joseph.
Okay, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Salamat Ma'am Katsi sa iyong napaka-lively na introduction as always. Alright, so pleasant morning to everyone dito po sa Philippines, and evening naman po or afternoon, especially sa ating speakers who are based in the US o kaya sa ating participants na nasa ibang bansa. Yeah, so on behalf of the Kapisanang Kimika ng Pilipinas, Southern Tagalog Incorporated, okay, the Board of Directors, and as well as our other co-host of this webinar, the UPLB Institute of Chemistry, headed by Dr. Marivic Laksamana, who unfortunately cannot join us today. So we all welcome you to this webinar. This is actually the second installment of our webinar series. The first one is about the resources that we can use for remote teaching, okay, which was delivered by Dr. Shelly Lansigan last July 24. And this is the second one, which will focus on assessment, okay, crafting assessments in this new normal situation. And we now have an esteemed team of discussion of resource speakers. Okay, lahat po sila ay experts on their own fields, and they're very much willing to share their experiences and strategies, okay, for remote teaching and assessment. All right. So we are all caught by the situation that we are in right now. Medyo talagang challenging po ang ating panahon ngayon, but we still hope that despite the hardships of these times, we would still be able to have the will and determination to educate our students for them to have their bright future. Okay. This webinar is our little way of equipping our teachers, okay, with the strategies for teaching and crafting assessments in this new normal that we are embracing right now. Okay. So again, in behalf of KKP-ST and UPLB Institute of Chemistry, we also would like to thank our co-host, the Filipino Science Hub, led by Dr. Jeffrey Bunkin. So salamat po sa pakikipag-team up with KKP-ST and IC. And I wish everyone a fruitful webinar. Sana po ay may matutunan tayong lahat. Maraming salamat po.
Ayan, thank you very much, Joseph. And now, let us now proceed with our webinar proper, entitled Navigating the New Normal. Okay, so we have 5 speakers. Okay, let's now move to the slide for the first speaker. Yeah. So our first speaker is an associate professor at the Department of Chemistry and Physical Sciences, Dyson College of Arts and Sciences, Pace University, New York City, New York. And he will be talking about the definition of assessment. So let us all welcome Dr. Elmer Rico E. Mojica. Elmer.
Maraming salamat, Katsi. So, narinig niyo ba ako? Ito na naman po tayo. Ako po ang nag-iisang tinik sa grupo na mag-present ngayon kasi yung 4 po yung mga rosas. So, good morning everyone. I was assigned with this topic, definition of assessment. Okay? So, when we're talking about assessment, okay, the Glossary of Education Reform refers to it as the wide variety of methods or tools that educators use to evaluate, measure, and document the academic readiness, learning progress, skill acquisition, or education needs of students. Okay. Another definition given by Brown and Ebe Wikrawa in 2010 refers to assessment as an ongoing educational practice that encompasses a wide range of methodological techniques. So I would say on my own, assessment is the engine which drives student learning. Okay, so I think to some of us, assessment was not taught to us. I can assure you, ngayon ko lang talaga naintindihan anong ibig sabihin ng assessment when we have to undergo retraining program during the transition to remote learning. Okay? So, ano man pagkakaiba ng assessment doon sa grading? So, the goal of grading is to evaluate individual students' learning and performance. So, usually, there's a corresponding letter or number to grading. Okay, you can say grading is an assessment, but not all assessment deals with grading. because the goal of assessment is to improve student learning. Although grading can play a role in the assessment, assessment also involves many ungraded measures of student learning. So there are two, we could say, main different assessment technique, and they can be defined as formative versus a summative assessment. So when we're talking about formative assessment, this refers to tools that identify misconceptions, struggles, and learning gaps along the way and assess how to close these gaps. So when we say formative assessment, this happens during the formation of learning. Sabi nga dito, it's part of the instructional process. So lahat ng ginagawa natin every time we meet our students, okay, in a face-to-face environment, we're doing formative assessment. Like we do quizzes, observation, creating T-charts, the Venn diagrams, the classwork, the homework, the writing and exit tickets. So lahat po yan formative assessment. So the way formative assessment is, we could say, defined, or the purpose of it is it helps teacher modify the future lesson planning based on the learner needs. Now, summative assessment, on the other hand, it's used to determine at a particular point in time what students know and do not know. So if we're going to look at deeper in the summative assessment, it evaluates the student learning, knowledge, proficiency, or success at the conclusion of an instructional period like a unit, course, or program. So we could say formative happens all the time. Summative, it might happen at the middle of the semester or at the end of the semester. And some of them we could say is the exam that we do. Here in the US, they have this state test. Okay. There we have the term paper at the end of the semester, the final exam at the end of the what we call semester. But if we're going to look, what is common between the two assessment is they're both ways to assess. The questioning strategies need to be addressed. Both need to be used to evaluate a student effectively, and both can be used as a student for student feedback, and it can assist us in future lesson plan. Now, the way that we differentiate formative with versus summative assessment, I got this when I attended an NSF information as a webinar. So they said when the chef tastes the soup, that's a formative. So he's tasting it, is it ready for the guest? But when the guest tastes the soup, that is already a summative assessment. Okay. Now, you can have a formal or informal assessment. So in a formal summative assessment, you can have there the examination, the thesis that you depend, the assignment, the research report, the oral presentation, or the portfolio. So what can we say about the formal? Usually they're graded. Okay. Although some of the informal summative assessment, they can also be graded. Oral presentation, interview, web posting, online task, or field trip or field study. Okay, let's say you go to a trip, like when we are in college, you get to the locust trip. Okay, now for the formative, formal and informal assessment, you have your web posting, assignment, homework, research plan, test, and laboratory test. And informal, you have interview, email exchange, research plan, discussion board posting, and then the online tool that Dr. Lansigan discussed in her last webinar here in KKP. And the dreaded thing that we have, the assessment for us or of learning. How these three are different. So between the three of them, two of them is dealt by the teacher, but one of them is dealt by the student. Okay, so if you're going to look at the purpose that they have here, when you're doing assessment for learning, its purpose is you want to assess the information to enhance the learning process. Okay, so we could say this assessment for learning is formative assessment. Okay, now when you're doing assessment as learning, its purpose is on the student. Focus on developing self-assessment and meta-cognition. And the goal there is for the students to monitor on learning. Now, when you're doing assessment of learning, okay, what you do here is you report the achievement of learning. So we could say this is a summative assessment. Okay? And if we're going to focus on some of the cartoons that I have here, so in first cartoon says here, I taught Spot how to whistle. And then I can hear him whistling. Okay? I said I taught him, I didn't say he learned it. So what type of assessment is this? Okay? So between the two, the assessment for learning is the one that you use to improve learning. So here, what they're doing is some sort of assessment for learning. Now, what's the problem that we have? Sometimes we don't get feedback from our students. Okay, we just say we taught it, but we didn't follow up, or we didn't get feedback to our students if our students learn what we taught them. Okay, so this slide, this is very common right now because it summarizes everything about the summative and the formative assessment. So as you could see here, in the summative assessment, you have there the teacher as the one that is more responsible, the one who do the decision on how the class will be handled. And then in terms of the formative, it's the student. And you can also see the difference. One is what? High stakes, and the other one is low stakes. Now, in between them, you have there what we call the assessment of learning, which demonstrate achievement. And below here is the assessment for learning, which gives feedback for learning and teaching. And then assessment as learning, which is to self-regulate and critically evaluate. Now, during the pandemic, most of the educators says, okay, that assessment, you should find an alternative to high-stake assessment. So they said there should be a shift from the assessment of learning to assessment as learning and assessment for learning. Now, we teachers, we learn from the products of the assessment and how to design a better learning environment. So as of now, we're going to have a new assessment as learning because this setup that we have has not happened before. So they said we concentrate more on the low stake at this time of the pandemic and how it affects our students. Then we go to the high stakes. And the way that you can do this assessment is doing this so-called Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, so this is the hierarchy of cognitive learning. So they said you can develop your assessment based on this Bloom taxonomy. So how are you going to develop this one? Okay, so the lowest what we call cognitive of learning is what? Remembering. So maybe you can ask your student to recall facts and basic concepts like definition, duplicate, memorization. And then the next one is you can ask them to explain ideas or concept. And then you can use some solving problem or demonstrate some of the concept, and then ask them to apply it, use information in new situations. Okay, and then you draw connections among the ideas wherein they do analyzing or they do some analysis, and then they do evaluation. And the top one in the hierarchy is you ask them to produce new or original idea. But as last word that they said, during this time, the Bloom's taxonomy is preceded by this Maslow hierarchy needs. Okay? Because mas tinitingnan daw yung needs ngayon kaysa dito sa Bloom taxonomy. So I hope you have learned something because we're just given 10 minutes and I think I'm over already. So thank you very much. If you have any question, you can start posting it. Okay, and we'll try to answer it at the end of the webinar. Maraming salamat po and I hope you learned something.
Okay, so thank you very much, Elmer. Marami kaming natutunan and marami pa kaming itatanong sa'yo later. Ayan, let's move on to our second speaker. Our second speaker is an assistant professor at the Department of Chemistry, Illinois College, Jacksonville, Illinois. And she will be talking about accessibility. Yan, isang napakalaking problema sa Pilipinas. So let us all welcome Dr. Jocelyn P. Lanorio. Jocy?
Thank you very much, Ma'am Katsi. Magandang umaga sa inyo lahat sa Pilipinas at good evening to those who are in the US. At bago po ako magsimula, gusto ko lang salamatan ang Filipino Science Hub, pati ang KKP-ST, pati na rin po ang ICUPLB kung saan ako graduate. It is a privilege to give a talk to our very enthusiastic teachers and educators. Some disclaimer, I also want to let you all know that my background is purely on chemistry. Wala po akong special education degree and I cannot consider myself an expert on this topic. But the reason why I am speaking to you today is I want to share with you what helped me during the spring 2020 remote learning transition. Pareho lang po tayo. Bago po sa akin ang lahat ng mga ituturo ko sa inyo. Assessment is so important because it drives the students' learning and learners will do anything to pass the assessment. Assessment is an integral part of learning. We want assessment to be an indicator of our students' learning, not a measure of how well they can access the material. Today, there will be 3 main points regarding my accessibility talk. During my talk, I will sometimes focus on one, but in most cases, they are all intertwined and connected. So those 3 will be evaluate your assessment, know your students, and less is more. Before teaching a lesson, we have a plan or learning objectives and outcomes based on the standards provided by the governing agencies, the Department of Education. For me, I use the guidelines set by the American Chemical Society in designing course content and assessment. I give a final test that is standardized, and then I compare the performance of my students to the other universities and colleges here in the US. So let's use all those LOs in creating our questions. Iwasan na masyadong marami ang tanong na isang learning objective lang or isa lang ang makukuha nating learning outcome. We also want to examine the range and depth, the level, for us to know where our students are. Are they novice? Are they intermediate? Or are they meeting expectations or beyond expectations? That way, we know what to focus on for each of our students and give the appropriate feedback and grades. Are all your exam questions hard? Gusto nyo din dapat na meron kayong easy, intermediate, at hard questions para hindi puro 100 o kaya palako lang ang grade na i-award ninyo sa inyong mga estudyante. Halimbawa po, huwag masyadong puro multiple choice ang tanong. Madali po yung i-grade, pero kawawa ang mga bata dahil right or wrong lang ang pwede nilang makuha. Magbigay po tayo ng short answer type of questions, problem-solving type of questions, kung saan pwede tayo mag-award ng partial points. This will motivate our students to do better and not just completely get discouraged because our assessment is just giving them right or wrong answer. Will be able to distinguish if the mistake is due to carelessness or understanding. Ang mali lang ba nila ay units? Mali ba sila sa pag-enter ng numbers sa calculator? Malalaman po natin lahat yan kung makikita natin ang kanilang solution, kung alam nila talaga kung tama ang sagot or konting step lang ang na-overlook nila. I mean, we need to know how long is the assessment that we created. How long is your test? 2 hours pa? Can you cut it into smaller chunks? Kung 2 oras po ba ito, kaya po ba natin itong hatiin sa 4 na 30 minutes para hindi mag-rely ang ating mga mag-aaral sa stable internet or Wi-Fi connection ng 2 oras? Testing window. The ideal setting right now is to have the test given in time but asynchronous mode. Halimbawa po, 2-day window, 1-hour test. Pwedeng i-take ng student ang test nyo, halimbawa buong Friday or buong Saturday. Anytime is okay, but it is timed. Ibig sabihin, as soon as i-click nila ang start icon or start test icon, magsisimula na po ang kanilang 1 oras at magsasarado po yung test after ng 1 oras. Bakit po ito important? Some of our students, my students, went out of the US, and those students had at least 13-hour difference compared to IC. Meron po sa Asia, meron pong umuwi sa Europe. Kahit po dito sa US, meron din pong iba't ibang time zones. In the Philippines, this can be beneficial for some, especially those who may need to wait until their baby brother or baby sister is already asleep. They can take tests at night when they won't be competing with everyone else in using the Wi-Fi connection. So another thing to consider in giving all this assessment is provide some weight on the process and effort and not just purely on the output. Isa pong scenario kung puro big exams lang yung ibibigay nyo. Halimbawa po, ang panggagalingan lang ng grades ng mga bata ay 3 big exams, 1 final exam. What if they have a fever or headache during that test date? Paano kung biglang nag-away sila ng kapatid nila or nag-away yung kanilang mga magulang? Or naka-experience sila ng kahit anong discomfort that the student cannot give their very best. So ang take-home message po, importante ang mini-assessment para alam natin kung nasa ang level ang ating mga estudyante. We want our assessment to provide a stage or an opportunity for the students to show what they are capable of with the material that they have learned in our classes. So makikita niyo po rito yung aking grading system para sa aking Chem 110 or General Chemistry course. Meron po akong pre-class assignment, meron din po akong ini-encourage sila for in-class work, and then after the lecture, ito po ang post-lecture assessment, 8% ng bawat grade. Mapapansin niyo rin po, instead ng exams, I have what is called chapter quizzes or unit quizzes. Dinivide ko po yung big contents into chapter quizzes para po hindi na-overwhelm ang mga estudyante. Moving on is something called empathy in design. Marami na pong nakakita sa atin ng picture na nasa kaliwa. This picture right here highlighted the disparity caused by COVID-19 based on students' social economic status. Masasabi niyo po ba na hindi motivated ang kahit isa sa dalawang data na nakikita niyo sa picture? We all know that COVID-19 itself causes equity problems. Some students do not have the right resources. Others do not have Wi-Fi or internet. Others may have the right equipment, but not the right signal or service. So ang nasa right picture naman po is an encouragement to give many options or outlet in conducting virtual learning and assessment. Different modalities such as computer, paper and pen, tablet, smartphone, kung pwede rin po ang TV, radio, should be explored. Second main point, know your students. Sinabi po ni Dr. Mojica ang tungkol sa formative assessment. Gamitin po natin ang ating mga formative assessment to the rescue. We will not know how to solve a problem if we do not know that it exists and who suffers from it. Use ongoing feedback for continuous improvement of the course. Marami na pong multiple remote learning surveys that are available online. Meron po ako mga i-click dito. Meron pong sample survey question. This one is for secondary students. It can be public, private, middle, and high school students. And makikita nyo po, na-assess nila, meron ba kayong laptop, meron ba kayong home computer, internet access, wireless ba to, ano pang available na devices, and so on and so forth. Meron din po tayong pwedeng gamitin na COVID-19 Daily Check-in Survey. So dito naman po, makikita nyo kung kumusta ang mga estudyante nyo. Pwede pong araw-araw. So na-envision ko po na bagay ito sa mga elementary. Tapos meron din pong question kung ano yung mga concerns nila about school or life in general, and ano yung mga barriers para makakonect sila sa online learning. Ito po yung copy ng remote learning survey na ginamit namin. This is from Dr. Mojica. All the speakers today have used the same content, same set of questions in knowing what we need to give our students. Meron ba silang computer? Meron ba silang reliable internet access? Makakatulong ba sa kanila kung manunood lang sila ng videos ng chemistry? Willing ba sila na makipag-meet virtually through Zoom? At ano yung mga video conferencing tools na gusto nilang itry? And then ito po yung pinaka-main point ng aming remote learning survey. Ano yung mga worried sila once we shift into remote learning? And ano yung mga suggestions nila to make this distance learning work well for them? So if you want a copy of our survey, clicking this link will automatically give you a forced copy of the remote learning survey. So moving on, the surveys will help you discover many things. Who among your students are mostly affected personally, socially, and emotionally? What you want is to provide the most resources to those who mostly need them. Kung makikita niyo po yung picture natin sa kaliwa, pag binigyan po natin ng same resources ang bawat estudyante, meron po na that is too much for that student. Meron din po na ang resource na binigay natin is not enough. At meron din mga cases na ang binigay niyong resources ay useless. So, dapat malaman niyo kung ano ang kailangan ng bawat estudyante and give the most to those who need those resources. This is equality on the left, and what we want to achieve is equity. So, assessment, makikita po dapat natin na equal kung ano ang nakikita ng mga estudyante sa likod ng bakod. So, ngayon po, iba-iba yung kailangan nila, pero pare-pareho po yung nakikita natin or nakikita nila. So, maa-assess po nila or maa-assess natin kung ano yung understanding ng bawat isang estudyante. Be cognizant of the things that there might be something going on at their home. What are the kids bringing in their classes? So here are the different issues that we found out from doing the remote learning survey. I have them divided, but some that are highlighted here are the ones experienced by my students. So lack of familiarity with required technologies, access to digital device. Wala po silang laptop, but they have mobile devices, smartphone. And some do not have access to specialized software such as statistical packages or Adobe products. Meron din pong learning educational issues. Now that lahat nag-asynchronous, nagkakaroon po ng competing or conflicting class meetings and schedules. Meron din po mga preferred ang face-to-face learning. Meron tayong mga student athlete na suddenly nawalan sila ng scholarship, kailangan nila mag-work, at nag-conflict yung kanilang work schedule with their learning schedule. So those are the different kinds of learning and educational issues. Ito po yung isa pa, student support services, health services, mental health services, financial aid. Meron po mga estudyante na wala silang matirhan, tumira po sila sa car. Merong mga bata na umaasa sila sa meal plan ng school, suddenly wala na silang access sa food service. Kapag po alam natin kung ano yung kulang at kailangan ng mga estudyante, we can give them testing accommodations. We can give them more time taking the test. Kung meron po silang visual impairment, we can give bigger font for the text of our exam. Kung meron pong colorblind, then we can assess, pwedeng gumamit tayo ng, i-consider natin yung color combination. Meron din pong malapit po kami sa Illinois School for the Deaf. And so, kung meron akong estudyante na deaf, I need to make sure that I have closed captioning. If we do hybrid learning, meron akong transparent mask for lip reading. Another thing na natutunan ko dito sa US, since mixed siya, diverse, merong mga hindi tayo ginagamit sa assessment dahil sa culture. Example po, pwede kayo maglagay, halimbawa naglagay kayo sa test nyo ng ang character is Ken and Barbie. Not everyone know that those are dolls. Mostly Americans lang at tayo since medyo alam natin yung ganon, nakaka-relate tayo. Pero not all culture understand or know Barbie and Ken. So ngayon, kung alam na po natin kung ano yung mga kailangan, makukonect na po natin sila sa tamang academic and career resource personnel. If class participation is part of your assessment, make sure to consider the following. Does a student look confused because they don't understand the material or because they can't figure out how to unmute themselves in Zoom? Is eye contact meaningful when there is no way to tell if the student is watching funny videos instead? If a student can hear the teacher, a simple speak up won't solve anything unless a few seconds are spent determining the source of the problem. So para mapalitan po natin itong confused face into a smiling face, we need to give them more guidelines, spend some time introducing visual interactions if attendance and participation are part of your grades or are part of their grades. So example po, kung gusto natin na lahat sila nagpa-participate pero wala palang microphone, pwede po natin gamitin ang hand signaling. So meron po tayong examples dito, meron tayong I agree, parang Y, disagreement, I'll add to that, tapos ito po, quote, and quote, I can paraphrase a concept, or I have a question. Meron din po ako ditong link for a visual guide that you can use and copy. Pero kung gagamitin po natin to, make sure na hindi po natin ika-crop yung credits. We want to give credit where credit is due. So wag po natin tatanggalin yung kung sino yung gumawa. Meron din po akong introduction. I devoted time to provide them introduction on how they can do non-verbal interaction. Tinuruan ko sila ng hand raising and feedback. I taught them how to use virtual background so that way kung chaotic po or merong gusto silang itago sa background nila, ang kanilang living condition, they can use virtual background. I also taught them how to use the chat box appropriately, kung ano yung breakout rooms at ano ang mga rules, and how to annotate appropriately. Ngayon po, nandun na tayo sa last main point, less is more. Sa ating pong assessment, we want to stick with just the learning management system. Para po, lahat ng colleagues natin, kung gumagamit sila ng LMS, in our case, Moodle po, lahat kami ay consistent. Lahat kami ay gumagamit ng Moodle. Wala na kaming dinadagdag na any other special learning management system. Wording. So sa akin po, since ang aking tinetest ay understanding in chemistry at hindi English, hindi reading comprehension, I will not use long passages but straight to the point. Ang question ko, for example, is what is most basic? Diretso po. Simple ang mga wordings. And then stick with the technologies that your students are already familiar with. Kung meron pong new technology kayo na i-introduce, provide step-by-step guidance. So equip your students with the skill set they need to be well and do well in your classroom assessment and this highly competitive, rapidly changing environment. So example, kung magbibigay po or magpapatuloy kayo ng oral presentation, isipin po natin, paano gagawin yun ng mga estudyante? So dito po, ipapakita ko sa inyo na may 3 options akong ginawa na binigay ko sa mga students. So example, lahat po sila merong iPhone sa aking OChem course. So gumawa po ako dito ng PowerPoint to walk them through how to use your iPhone or iPad para mag-screen record. Available po to para sa inyo, pwede nyo pong kopyahin at pwede nyo pong gamitin para sa mga estudyante nyo. Option number 2, Zoom is also good for screen record. So ito po yung ginawa ko. Gumawa rin po ako ng PowerPoint. I helped my student. I gave them step-by-step procedure on how to log in using our Illinois College Zoom app and how to schedule meeting, how to share their slides. So again, available din po ito sa inyo, pero meron po mga portions na hindi applicable para sa inyo, kasi po para sa Illinois College students. And then we also have specialized screen recording options called Echo 360. And ipapakita ko po sa inyo kung ano yung result na nakuha ko from my students. So I'll be sharing computer sound, and I'll be sharing a sample product for my students from the Bridge program. So you can see in here, I want them to learn how to use Echo 360. I want them to use Google Slides, and here's the product.
Okay, my name's Carissa Duncan, and 3 facts about me is I have always been curious about how eyes work, and specifically issues with the eyes, and I hope to pursue a career in orthoptics.
So makikita po nyo na meron po akong 4 na learning objectives na nakuha. Number 1, nakilala ko yung aking estudyante. Natuto sila how to use Google Slides. Natuto siya how to use Echo 360. At ang number 4, natuto siya mag-upload at mag-share ng Echo 360 screen recording. 4 po yung na-target ko na learning outcome just by helping the student see the process of using Echo 360. So are there any other options available to you and to your students? Help them. Give them step-by-step guidelines. So meron din po akong other examples here. Meron po akong assessments sa organic chemistry where I want them to do correlation analysis. So ang ginawa ko po, gumawa ako ng tutorial about how to use that data analysis add-in in Excel. So again, ito po ay isang YouTube tutorial, medyo maingay.
So I am going to learn properties, and which among these 4 affects the rate of reaction. So this log can be here is the rate of reaction. And my main goal is to see, is it the heat of reaction that affect.
So again, meron pong tutorial na ipinakita ko sa mga estudyante. Well-guided ang mga estudyante. Since ang aking gusto ay assessment ng understanding, dapat hindi barrier ang use of any app or any tools para makita ko kung naintindihan nila yung chemistry concept. And last dito po, gamitin natin ang kanilang merong equipment, which is smartphone. Paano po sila magsasabit ng answer? So, meron po ako ditong tutorial kung paano sila gagamit ng paper, and susulat nila yung sagot nila, problem solving, your solution, and then mechanism po at organic chemistry ang tinuturo ko. Predict the product, susulat nila yung chemical structure. So ang ginawa ko po, meron akong tutorial where I taught them how to use their smartphone in taking pictures.
Hello everyone, so today I'm going to show you an alternative
converting multiple pages into one single PDF file. So
to not having a printer or a scanner at home. So I have here 3 different pages of my handwritten work and my iPhone. And so you should have at least here a smartphone. It can be iPhone or Android, or you can use your. And then you want to create new notes by looking for that little square with a pencil. So I'm going to press on that icon next.
So, ang main point po, magbigay kayo ng tutorial, magbigay kayo ng guideline. And again, that is available for you. Pwede nyo pong kopyahin, pwede nyo pong i-provide sa inyong estudyante. Okay. So, ito po ang example ng isa sa mga assessment or final project na binigay ko sa aking honors class. So, makikita nyo po na ang gusto kong malaman is, can they explain an organic chemistry and its connection to real life? So ang ginawa ko po, pwede nilang i-express ang kanilang sagot sa kahit anong gusto nilang way. Pwedeng art, pwedeng video, pwedeng literature review, research project, pwede rin po sa pagbabasa nitong book na punong-puno ng organic chemistry molecular structure, pwede pong by music, or kahit ano pong gusto nila basta i-discuss lang po nila sa. So, sinabit ko po sa supervisor, and makikita nyo po, nagustuhan ng supervisor kasi may choice ang estudyante, mai-integrate yung mga interests at liberal arts training, at maiintindihan talaga nila ang isang concept. Detailed din ang assignment at pati instructions. Okay. We also want to equip our students with the correct mindset. So, ngayong time na lahat ay uncertain, bigyan po natin sila ng certainty. So, ang example po nito is, bigyan natin sila, halimbawa, gusto nyo silang mag-take ng isang exam in person. pero may walking path to that classroom, may mga safety measures na kailangan i-observe, magbigay po kayo ng video kung ano yung kailangan nilang gawin para hindi po sila ma-surprise. Ito po yung example ng ginawa ko. Binigyan ko sila ng walking path papunta sa classroom kung saan nila ititake yung test. So here's KKP-ST. This is going to be our classroom. This is the entrance. Once you enter the room, there is social distancing. May mga label yung mga desks. Makikita niyo yung mga yellow tape. 6 feet apart from each other, social distancing. Okay? Pinakita ko sa kanila yung buong classroom para alam nila kung ano yung mangyayari. Okay? Less anxiety. And the safety measures, alam po natin na bawat pumasok sa isang room, kailangan po nilang kumuha ng wipes, kailangan po nilang gumamit ng hand sanitizer. So ginawa ko rin po yun. Naglagay ako ng video for entering and exiting KKP-ST classroom. So makikita niyo po rito kung ano yung dapat. So staggered ang pagpasok, i-occupy agad yung mga nasa harap instead na dun sa dulo. Tapos makikita niyo po later, iwa-wipe down nila yung full surface ng desk nila bago simula yung klase, bago magsimula yung exam. Okay? At last po, lagi po natin sinasabi na we're all in this together. So invite your students to give you feedback to help you with providing tech tutorials to the whole classroom. So here's one example. Meron ako mga estudyante, since nakita nila iPhone yung ginagamit ko, they provided me with tutorial videos on how to use Android, Samsung Galaxy in creating one PDF file of multiple pictures para rin po sa assessment. And worth it ba lahat ng effort na gagawin nyo para sa pag-create lang ng exam or pag-create lang ng pag-isip ng accessibility? Yes, it's all worth it. Makikita nyo po, ito po ang real results ng aking klase last spring 2020. Ang mga submission po nila, palaging lahat nag-submit. Ito po ang participants ng aking OCAM 21. Lahat sila nag-submit on time. I checked the Moodle at around 12, lahat nandun, ako na lang ang kailangan mag-grade. At pati po ang participation, through Zoom, nakita ko, they are all attentive. So meron po akong around 39 minutes ng Zoom meeting. They were all there and they were all 100% engaged. Another rewarding experience is mapapansin po nila ang effort na gagawin nyo. Makaka-receive kayo ng mga thank yous, makikita nyo na pinadali nyo yung life ng student, na-assess nyo at nabigay nyo kung ano yung kailangan nila, na bigay nyo sa kanila ang positive learning experience at the best maximum learning possible. At ito po yung makikita ng mga administrators. Lahat po na binanggit ko ngayon sa inyo, makikita nyo po sa evaluation ko. Makikita nila na ang mga estudyante ko, they are still challenged, okay? But I gave them all the resources. Makikita niyo po dito, lahat ng daily problem sets, naging helpful sa kanila, nakapag-turn in pa rin sila, na bigay ko sa kanila ang enthusiasm na meron ako para sa chemistry, passion for chemistry. At yeah, lahat ay masaya. So that's it. That's all I have.
Yan. Yeah. Thank you very much, Jocy. And now let's move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is an assistant professor at the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, Benedictine College, Atchison, Kansas. And she will be talking about assessment delivery and design. Let us all welcome Dr. Patrisha J. Pham Bugayong. Trixie.
Good morning po sa inyong lahat. Thank you po for inviting me to give this talk and share with everyone back home the little I know about assessment design and the delivery of this assessment. So I'm certainly not the expert, but I'll try to share with you some tips that would be applicable back home. So let me start my talk by describing a strategy in instructional course design. And this strategy is known as ADDIE. So ADDIE stands for Analysis, Design, Development, Implementation, and Evaluation. So under analysis, you have identification of learning objectives. Under design, you have designing assessments and designing the content and activities that go along with that, and selecting how to deliver this assessment. So that's all under design. And under development, you have developing the course materials, then implementing the course itself, and then evaluating and revising. So the reason why I wanted to share this strategy with all of you is that in order for you to be able to successfully design great assessments, is that there's a pre-existing or there's a task that you guys have to do. And the first task is to be able to identify good learning objectives or learning objectives in your respective courses. So this is applicable to all courses, not just chemistry. So how do you determine your learning objectives? So the determination is a process. So it starts with the most complex and challenging important outcomes in your class. So you have to set that first. So it falls under course goals. And then you have to break that down into smaller parts. And then finally, the last step is to consider the most basic and fundamental skills your students need to possess or achieve to be successful in a class. So yan pong una nating task. That's the first task, is to determine what are the learning goals of your course. So this is a reflective exercise for everyone, for all the teachers, in that you sit down, you think about your course goals, and then from there, derive learning objectives. So learning objectives are measurable, and normally they contain words like, upon leaving this course, your students will be able to, or students will be able to demonstrate, etc. And the words that you use for learning objectives actually can be derived from Dr. Mojica's Bloom's taxonomy when he mentioned it a while ago. So, for example, if the learning objective that you've set for your class is this one, learners will be able to label the parts of the human respiratory system, okay? Then a corresponding assessment for that would be to give them an image of the human respiratory system so that it will prompt the students to label the parts. And then once you have that form of assessment, you have an activity, a corresponding activity, such as them practicing labeling the parts. So the idea behind this is that once you have your learning objectives set, it's easier to make or design an assessment that matches with your learning objectives. And it's easier now to also assign the sort of activities that go with that learning objective, with assessment. So once you have your learning objectives already set, it's now time to move on to the actual designing of your assessment tool. So I've listed a few things to guide you in making your assessments. So first, you have to determine the outcome of the assessment. So is it a test at the end of the course, or is it at the beginning of the course? You have to define your learning targets. Is it you have to define this clearly at the start. So you have to also set the level of rigor of the learning target, meaning do you have the content at the right time. And I think the most important step here in this set is that you should be able to match the assessment method with the learning target. So syempre po, we don't want to make a big test, di ba? Hindi po tayo maggagawa ng malaking test sa first day of class. So matching is going to be very important in your decision of what sort of assessment you'll do. And then once you have that in mind, you can create the assessment blueprint and then put in select test items or tasks in the assessment. So I've compiled for you, for everyone back home, some of the assessment tools that I've used for some of my classes, as well as some of the assessment tools that I've encountered along the way. So on this side, you have more of the traditional ones. So you have exams, you have the written assessments, which include essays. What else? You have your portfolio, you have poster sessions, you have journals, you have blogs, and then you have presentations. It's a form of assessment. So it can either be pre-recorded or it can be live. And then you have exhibitions that fall under this. You have self-assessments that include surveys and quizzes, reflective assignments, and peer assessments and creative assessments will be discussed further by another colleague of mine later in the webinar. So all of this would have specific designs. So even if you Google what would be the tips in designing a good exam, you would be able to find tips. So I'm going to list a few tips that I've used personally for me when I do, when I craft an exam. And so it's applicable also for all courses. It doesn't just have to be just chemistry. And you have to, of course, write clear instructions, be explicit, unambiguous, and you have to preview the exam. And I think on this list, the most important one that I find really valuable is to actually enlist a colleague or a TA to read for your exam. So lahat po tayo ngayon, at some point, we're isolated, right? Because of the pandemic. And maybe it's been a while since you've seen someone and have someone read things that you've made. So it's advisable that at this point that when you make an exam, before you actually release the exam to your students, it would be wise to have someone read it and look at it. Because a new pair of eyes would be beneficial for you at some point. So this is an example of an exam that probably needs more, editing, okay? But this was released somewhere. And as you can see, the first question is already very vague. So try not to, post vague questions on your tests because that would confuse your students. And as I've said, if you had an extra pair of eyes, someone would have seen this one and would have mentioned that this probably needs a little bit of editing. So that's a piece of advice. So now, once you've designed your assessment, as I've said, there are many criteria for the various assessment tools that I mentioned a while ago. But the question now is, how do you deliver this assessment tools that you've designed, right? So there are two ways. Either you do an online or a modular form. So for an online form of delivery, you have various learning management systems. And the learning management systems that I've listed here is probably not comprehensive, but these are learning management systems that have been used all over here in the US. So for our university, we use a learning management system called Blackboard. You might be familiar with that. Some universities use Canvas or Moodle, okay? So these are examples of that. And then once you've decided on going online, then you have to decide whether you want to do a high-stake online high-stake one as form of assessment, or a low-stake online low-stake form of assessment. Because certainly those two things are different. Because for online low-stake form of assessments, you don't need a proctor, and for online high-stake forms of assessment, you do need a proctor, and that will be expounded on by another colleague of mine later in. Under the topic of cheating. So, but I want to show you a learning management system that is gaining traction now, one, primarily because it is free. And that's what we want, right? So if our university can subscribe to one, then there are ways that we can, there are learning management systems that are free. And I'm pretty sure you've heard about it. Some of you might have heard about it. It's called Google Classroom. So Google Classroom, I like the interface because it's very simple. All you have to do is either join a class or create a class. So when you create a class, you have to put in a class name, your section, doesn't matter. If you're online, a subject, a room, and then you click create. So I've created an example of a trial classroom, and you can change this whatever theme you'd like. So if you're in chemistry, or if you're in biology, or if you're in communications, you can just spruce this up whatever you like, however you like. And the if you look at the top portion, you have coursework as well as grades, and it's very simple. So all you have to do is to click one, okay? It's going to bring you to a page wherein you can create your assessment tool. So if you click create, it's going to populate it with this. You have assignments, you have quiz assignments, you have questions and materials that you can create. And so when I click on assignment, say for example, you can put in a title for assignment, instructions that you want the students to do. You have points, and then you have the due date when you want this one submitted. You have an extra box here where you can put in your rubric if you have one. Then once you click that, you create an assignment. It's very easy. So I've created an assignment, an example assignment, and then you wait for the students to submit. So you can see how many students submit or how many students still need to submit the assignment. And then from there, you can click the individual assignments and then put grades on it. You can also put feedback on it, which the students can see. So this is something that all of back home, everyone back home can use. It's free. All you have to do is create an account and be able to, just navigate through it, create a simple assignment and release it to the students. So the question is, who'll receive it, right? Because not everyone has access to the internet. So there are other virtual online assessment techniques that you can use. One that I've encountered is what you call 3-to-1 evaluation. So this is certainly applicable to any content area, and it involves asking your students to name 3 themes that they have learned in a unit, 2 questions that they still had, and 1 idea they wanted to share with others. So under that also you have self-check exercises, provide them with exams or quizzes that's already answered so that they can grade themselves and that they can get immediate feedback. So it doesn't, you don't necessarily have to check everything because there's already an answer sheet for that they could look at, and then immediately they'll get feedback from that. So now here's the question. What do you do without the internet? So without the internet, but you still have a device or some sort of technology. So maybe a cell phone, perhaps. So kung walang laptop, pero may cell phone, what do you do? So a piece of advice that I've seen and read somewhere is that you can do the offline mode. And there are a couple of learning management systems that you can, you can use that offers an offline mode. Although I don't think these are free, okay? But the key here is to use something offline. So you can also save files to a USB flash drive, which I think at some point in my career when I was back home, I did this. And then once you save the web pages, you can view this offline. Or you can use also offline option apps. Google Chromebook has this. I've provided a link for you to look at. Or you can ask someone's help to set up offline access. But the key here is that there are web pages that you can use in an offline mode. So this is applicable for those who don't have internet access, but still want to use or look at web pages. So if, however, you don't have access to the internet and you don't have technology that will go along with that, what do you do? So you can use module modules. So a module contains the following components. You have an introduction to the module itself. It would contain activities that you would provide your students. It would provide opportunities for students to practice and apply the new information that they've learned in the module, and a chance for them to reflect. So I've highlighted the keywords. So reflect means in this portion, you should be able to include a formal or informal type of assessment. And that's where the assessment sort of changes, because do you do a test or do you do a quiz? So it really is very dependent on what your learning objectives are. And then provide a feedback mechanism for the students so that, you don't want the modules to just go out, and then never hear from any of the modules. So provide a feedback mechanism. So once you created the modules, there are many ways to send it out. So one form is to physically mail the packet, send the packets out, or you can partner with a local television station to broadcast it, which is a little bit harder, or radio station, or just employ the library or your own school, or probably a nearby public establishment, so that you can get, you can assign those as drop-off or pick-up points, wherein the students can actually get or bring back the modules. So my tip here is that you have to, if you can remember this worksheet continuum, wherein on one side you have the busy sheets, and the other side you have power sheets. And the busy sheet is more of low-level recall stuff, just fill in the blanks, choosing multiple choice questions, and more of time killers, just time killers. So for power sheets, these are more thought-provoking type. So when you design your modules and you are sort of thinking about, so iniisip nyo po, ano ba itong module ko? Where will I put this? So it is advisable that you can use this worksheet continuum and see where it sits. Is it more of a busy sheet or is it more of a power sheet? Because you don't really need to bulk up your modules. The modules have to have more, it's more quality over quantity. So you decide on the, the type of things that you put in your module set. So I'd like to introduce a concept. It's called authentic assessment. And authentic assessment are tasks that are based off of real-world professional scenarios. So say, for example, your area is biology, your discipline area is biology. You can give them a research project wherein you want them to design and conduct an experiment to answer a real-world ecological problem. So instead of giving them a grand test at the end. And why are authentic assessments really nice? They're good because they pair up fairly well with the modular form of delivery, right? So when you send this out, you're not worried, you're not anxious that the students will be copying off from each other, because the answers for this authentic assessments are very unique and would be very specific for the student or for the individual. So maybe we should think about incorporating more of the authentic assessments on our modules or our packets when we send them out to the students. So another example would be in engineering. So instead of giving them a test, you can also incorporate applying basic statistical methods to a variety of real-world, problems. So have them think about it. So all of these answers would be more unique per student. So whether you choose an online or modular form of delivery, it is important that you provide the students a way of getting feedback, receiving or getting feedback. So for online delivery, it is easy because it's quick. Once you have your assessment out, you get, they can get feedback from you pretty quick. But I understand that our setting is not the same. when you send out a module, you know, it may take weeks, right, to get out, you know, to hear back from them. But it is important that in the modules that have to be sent out, that there is some sort of feedback, a feedback mechanism. You don't want to wait until the end and hear from the student when there's already, you know, just one major test. So that would be my piece of advice for, you know, going with either route. So with this, I would like to thank you guys for listening to my talk, and then I would be happy to answer any questions that you'll have later. There would probably be a lot on the delivery aspect, but I would welcome the questions later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Trixie. Ang dami naming natutunan na magagandang mga ideas from you, and marami pang gustong malaman later from you. No? So standby ka lang dyan. Let's now go to our next speaker. Okay, our next speaker is a familiar person to you. I know na-miss niyo siya. At nagbabalik siya ngayon sa atin. Ay, sorry, mamaya pa pala siya. Mali ang napakitang slide. Anyway, yan, naging advanced tuloy. Anyway, we have now another speaker. So our next speaker is a lecturer from the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry, Baylor University, Waco, Texas. And she will be talking about assessment integrity na isa pa rin sa pinoproblema natin sa ngayon sa ating gagawing remote learning. So, to learn more about that, let's hear from Dr. Aurea M. Chu. Okay,
let me share my screen. Okay. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Masaya po ako at nakasama ko sa webinar na ito. In the next 10 minutes, we will discuss assessment integrity. So ang objective ko po is to explore the reasons behind cheating and discuss what can we do as educators to minimize it. Okay. It's not moving. Okay. So bakit po natin kailangan i-protect ang ating assessment? Gusto po natin na ma-ensure na meaningful po ang results, reliable at accurate. So meron po akong na-identify na 3 violations or breaches of assessment integrity. Plagiarism, alam po natin kung ano to, collusion, saka po yung cheating in exam. Okay? I'm going to concentrate on the last one, the cheating in exam. Okay, so dito po, alam po natin na ang exam, this is the most common method to assess students' learning progress. So yung mga example po dito, ito po yung mga form ng cheating. For example po, yung student, they use materials such as textbooks, notes, formula list na hindi po inallow ng teacher. So that's a form of cheating. Pwede din po when they collaborate without your permission. Okay? And then they ask somebody else to answer their test. So ito po yung mga cheating sa exam. Okay, so dito po sa slide na to, makikita po natin ang top selling products during COVID-19 pandemic. Meron po tayong mga protective supplies, cleaning materials. Sa education sector, meron po tayong Zoom, which is a communication platform. Sa chemistry po, sikat po ngayon yung Chem 101. This is an active learning platform. Saka po yung anti-cheating technology. So why am I showing this? Kasi po, bukod dyan, yung cheating in online classes is now a big business. So itong mga sites po na to, these sites provide opportunity for students to ask questions. Ang problema po dito, they ask questions while they are taking their exam. So this is a form of cheating po. So iba yung sumasagot sa exam nila. In fact po, yung check, na-report po na nag-increase ang stock over 100% simula po nung nag-shift po tayo sa online teaching. Okay? And in addition, na-report din po na 70% ng students, inadmit po nila na nag-cheat sila pag ang exam po ay online. Okay? So kung meron po kayong FB account, tapos nag-teach po kayo ng chemistry, maybe po nag-join po kayo ng group na to, the strategies for teaching chemistry online. So makikita nyo po dito, ang dami pong posts about assessment and also cheating. So pag binasa nyo po, makikita nyo kung gaano ka-frustrated yung mga teachers natin. Okay? So I share the same frustration because I have similar experience sa mga ganyang cheating po. Okay? Una muna po, isipin po natin, paano po ba natin mapiprevent ang cheating? To prevent cheating, dapat po alam natin, why do students cheat? So itong mga reasons po na naandito, they are similar po, pare-pareho across the world. So syempre po, yung cheating is easier but harder to monitor in an online setting. Hindi po natin sila madaling ma-catch, mahuli. Pangalawa po yung students, of course, fear of failure kasi baka po mawala yung kanilang scholarship, yung assistantship. Okay, the third reason is inability to handle difficult materials. Okay, so before the pandemic, before po tayo nag-shift sa online teaching, marami pong resources for student to ask help. Meron pong mga pre-tutorials. Pero po nung nag-shift po tayo sa online setting, nahirapan na po ang mga estudyante to ask help. Okay? Time management is another reason. Marami po tayong students na kailangang mag-work. Okay? They are working students, so they have to manage their time wisely. Ang iba naman po, heavy po yung load po nila, yung course load po nila. Another reason is maybe hindi po sila familiar sa honor code or wala po kayong sinet na class policy about cheating. So, na-encourage po silang mag-cheat. Okay? Some students, they do not use searching exam answers through the internet as cheating. They think po na they are just being resourceful. So, ito po yung reasons, common reasons why students cheat. Okay? So, before po ako mag-continue, paki-launch nga ang poll, Joseph. Meron po akong question sa inyo. Okay, so naniniwala po ba kayo na ang teachers po, kayo po, contribute to cheating? Aba, tingnan po natin ang results. Okay. So 110, 111. Okay, so as you can see po, karamihan sa atin po naniniwala na meron po tayong part kung bakit po nag-cheat ang ating mga students. Okay, i-end ko na po yung poll. Okay, so about 76% po believe na teachers contribute to cheating. Okay. Okay po. So now, tama po kayo. The answer here is yes. Okay? Teachers contribute to cheating. Okay? So bakit po kaya? Bakit po tayo nakako-contribute sa cheating na estudyante? Bakit po natin na-encourage ang mga students to cheat? So ito po yung mga reasons. Students really get caught. Siyempre po, kung hindi sila mahuhuli, mawiwili po silang mag-cheat. Second po, faculty fail to follow through when cheating is observed. Although meron po tayong na ano po natin na nag-cheat ang estudyante, pero minsan po wala tayong evidence. Po? So suspected cheating but kailangan po natin ng proof. Kailangan po nating i-prove. So matindi po yung proof kasi malaki po yung consequence sa students. Pwede po siyang ma-expel. Okay? So, fear of lawsuits. For example po sa US, natatakot po tayo sa mga demanda, sa mga lawsuits. And also, it's time-consuming. The time involved in pursuing cheating incidents takes a longer time po. So, sometimes, napapabayaan po natin, hindi po tayo nag-a-act. So, pag hindi po tayo nag-act, then mawiwili po yung students natin na mag-cheat. Okay? It's not moving. Okay, So as teachers, paano po ba natin mapiprevent ang cheating? What can we do? Okay? So ang una po, get to know your students. Sa first day pa lang po, get to know your students. Kasi daw po yung mga students who feel a great distance with an instructor cheat more. Kung mas kilala po kayo ng student, they will respect you more. Mas matatakot po silang mag-cheat. Mas mahihiya po sila. Yung pangalawa po, you let your student feel your presence even po sa online setting. So you interact with the students. So ask them ano po ba yung learning goal nila? Paano mo po ba sila matutulungan to reach their learning goal? Okay? So magtanong po kayo sa kanila para makilala nyo sila. Okay? You also need to introduce yourself para maging komportable po yung students sa inyo. Okay? And then yung third one po, let me just, oh no, sorry. Okay, where am I? Okay, so yung pangatlo po, yung syllabus nyo po, you have to include information about academic integrity and the consequences of violations. So dapat po aware ang students doon na meron po kayong written agreement with the student kasi ganun po yung syllabus. Ito po yung example na nilalagay ko sa syllabus ko. Okay, para makita po ng students na we are serious. Okay, pagdating po sa cheating. Okay, aside from that, dinidefine ko din po sila sa kanila kung ano yung kinukonsider ko na cheating. Okay, para po alam nila, maging aware sila, at kung ano po yung mga pwedeng mangyari pag nag-cheat sila. Okay, sinasabi ko po sa kanila na I'm willing to help them succeed. Pero pag nakita ko po sila nag-cheat, I'm willing to act. Okay, so maging vigilant po tayo. Okay, so paano naman po ang paggawa ng exam para ma-prevent nyo ang cheating? So ito po yung mga strategies for minimizing cheating in online assessment with your learning management system. Katulad po ng Canvas, Blackboard, Google Classroom, Moodle, etc. Okay, so yung una po, ang first task na ina-ask ko po sa student is to sign an academic honesty statement. Okay, sa bawat exam po ginagawa ko to. Ito po yung example. I pledge on my honor that. And then I will ask the student to accept this honor statement by typing their full name on the answer box. Okay, so ito po yung ginagawa ko. Pangalawa po, sometimes sinusulat ko po, I write my own question or problem. Okay, so for example po, itong question na to, actually hindi po to sa akin. Ito po ay galing sa Journal of Chemical Education. So nag-formulate po siya ng sarili niyang question. So instead po na common acids na pwede po nilang i-search sa internet, gumawa po siya ng sarili niyang ion. Okay, so maganda po yung question na to. Okay, so because of this, hindi po pwede itong i-search ng estudyante sa internet. Okay, so mag-iisip po sila, hindi lang isi-search nila yung answer sa internet. So, kakatulong po if you make your own question or your problem. Okay, so yung pangatlo po, instead of using a fixed number of test item that remain unchanged for each exam, pwede nyo po i-consider na gumamit ng question bank. Okay, sa inyo pong LMS. Like sa Canvas po, pag ginamit po namin itong question group feature in Canvas, pwede po kami mag-create ng assessment that randomly select questions from each text chapter. Halimbawa po sa chapter 1, meron pong 10 questions. Chapter 2, meron pong 10 questions. So in effect po, magkakaroon ng, mag-create ng multiple versions of the exam. Okay, so sa isang class po, meron po kayo iba-ibang version ng test. So mapiprevent din po ang cheating. Okay, so another strategy po is sa LMS nyo po, use the time limit feature. Siyempre po yung mga students that are not prepared, okay, kung limited po yung time limit, nilimit nyo po yung time na exam, let's say 1 hour exam lang po, students who are not prepared would not have much time to research the answer in the internet. Okay, hindi po pwedeng one to sawa. Dapat isi-set nyo po yung time. Siyempre po yung mga prepared na mag-take na exam, yung mga nag-aral, unlikely po silang ubos ng time to search the answer from the internet. Okay? Another one is display one question at a time. Kasi po, kung hindi nyo i-display ang question one at a time, madali pong i-capture, screen capture ng students kung meron po kayong, if multiple questions are displayed. Okay? So pag napicturean po nila, madali po nilang i-share sa ibang students or i-upload sa mga cheating sites. Okay? So another strategy is you include subjective questions. Hindi lang po objective questions like multiple choice, true or false, fill in the blanks. Dapat po mag-include din kayo ng short essay or short answer question. So for example po dito, explain why does aluminum bend while sodium chloride crack when you hammer them. So ma-encourage nyo po yung students na magkaroon ng critical thinking. Okay, ma-assess nyo po ang critical thinking ng students. Okay, so ito po mapiprevent niya ang cheating. Okay, so ang isa pa po is kung available po sa school nyo, you explore online proctoring software. At tulad po ng sa school po namin, meron po kaming Respondus lockdown browser, meron din pong Respondus monitor. So pag ginamit po nyo to sa exam, mapiprevent po ang students na mag-search sa internet. Okay? Kasi ila-lockdown po niya yung browser. Hindi po sila pwedeng pumunta sa ibang, mag-open na ibang tab. And meron din po siyang webcam monitoring system. So ipa-plug po sila ng system kung meron pong suspicious activity like cheating po. Okay? So although hindi po lahat ng school are able to buy this software, pwede rin po kayo mag-proctor using Zoom. Okay, so last summer po ang ginawa ko, in addition to Respondus monitor, nag-proctor din po ako ng exam through Zoom. So nag-login po ang student sa kanilang cellphone. Using their cellphone, nag-login po sila sa Zoom, and then doon po sa kanilang laptop, doon po nila inopen yung exam through lockdown monitor. Okay? But before you use this, make sure po na nasa syllabus nyo po yan para ready sila. Hindi po pwede na bigla nyo na lang silang sasabihan a day before the test na kailangan ipoproctor nyo yung exam through Zoom or Skype. Okay? Dapat po nasa syllabus nyo po lahat ito. And then yung last po, explore alternative forms of assessment. So na-discuss na po ito ni Dr. Lanorio and ni Trixie po. So for example po, have them solve a problem or make a concept map of the subject and then provide a video explanation. So i-discuss din po ito ni Michele, our next speaker. Okay? So ang example po nito is this question. Let's say, ipakita nyo po itong ganitong jar. So in a 1-minute video, ask the student how you can determine the number of moles of gas in this jar. So wala na pong ibang given. Ito po yung question, itong jar. So kung nag-aral po ang students, alam po nila kung paano nila ma-determine yung number of moles. Dapat po, alam po nila na kailangan nila ng pressure, ng volume, ng temperature po. Okay? So this kind of question, mapiprevent po nito yung cheating. Okay? So i-elaborate po ito ni Dr. Lansigan, our next speaker. Okay, so here are my conclusions. Una po, cheating does happen. Okay? There's no system. No system is going to fully stop cheating. Wala pong magic na mag-stop sa cheating. At nangyayari po siya, but prevention po is the best way to stop cheating. Okay? So salamat po sa pakikinig nyo. If you have any questions, kakaroon po tayo ng questions and answers after po ng last speaker natin. Thank you po.
Okay, thank you very much, Ate Au. Ang dami namin natutunan.
Oh, salamat.
Kasi
How
medyo
will
bago itong topic mo, so talagang maraming mga trigger sa aming mga isip na mga bagong ideas. Okay, thank you, Ate Au. Now let's proceed with our last speaker. Okay, so hindi na siya surprise kasi nakita niyo na kanina. Anyway, nagbabalik ang ating speaker last time. So she is a senior professorial lecturer at the Department of Chemistry, American University, Washington, D.C. And now she will be talking about alternative assessment tools and strategies. So guys, let's welcome back Dr. Michele P. Lansigan. Shelly.
Thank you very much, Ma'am Katsi. So let me just share my screen. All right. So thank you very much and magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Unang-una maraming salamat po sa KKP-ST, sa Institute of Chemistry and PhilSci Hub for having me over again. And of course, sa ating pong mga teachers na kahit Sabado po ng umaga nanonood po kayo. So maraming salamat po. So we've been talking about assessments this whole time and we've been doing assessments for our face-to-face classes para ma-assess natin kung na-achieve ba natin yung learning outcomes for our courses. Yung mga assessments po natin sa face-to-face, pwede naman siyang i-translate sa online mode, pero iba lang yung way ng pagmamanage natin. So si Professor Bugayong, diniscuss niyo yung kanina, pati si Dr. Lanorio, discuss nila kanina kung ano yung mga klaseng assessments na pwedeng gawin. So my part for this particular webinar is to offer you alternative assessments for both online and distance learning. So as we learned a few minutes ago, yung alam na natin, assessments are not just limited to exams. Hindi lang talaga multiple choice, true or false, so pwede natin gawin. Marami pa tayong pwedeng gawing creative exams to assess our students' knowledge about our courses. So assessments can be any task or any activity that evaluates students' progress towards your course learning outcomes. So ang gusto ko lang i-highlight dito yung learning outcomes, which Dr. Pineda has elaborated on earlier. So just as a refresher, learning outcomes are specific, measurable knowledge and skills that the learner will gain by taking your class. So pag sinabing learning outcomes, nakakabit doon yung assessments. Kasi bago pa man tayo gumawa ng assessments, dapat na-write down na natin at saka very clear na yung ating mga learning outcomes. So assessments and learning outcomes, they should both align. Lagi silang dapat na magkakambal, kumbaga. They should always align. So bakit importante na clear yung ating learning outcomes? Importante siya kasi it helps learners see why content and assessments are relevant to them. And also, halimbawa sa class ko, ang nagtuturo po ako ng forensic science. So one of my learning outcomes for the course is that at the end of the semester, students should be able to synthesize theory, observation, and experimentation to understand how forensic scientists operate and use scientific evidence in a legal context through laboratory experiments. So dahil alam ng mga students na ito yung learning outcomes, naiintindihan nila kung bakit nila kailangan gumawa ng lab reports. So if you're very explicit about our learning outcomes, maintindihan ng mga students natin kung bakit sila ina-assess in that way. Learning outcomes or very clear learning outcomes also help teachers choose the best assessment techniques for their courses. So as I mentioned, hindi lang talaga siya limited sa exams. Ano ngayon yung pwede nating i-assess sa mga estudyante natin in an online setting? So we can look at their interactivity or yung way ng pag-participate nila or engagement sa ating courses. We can also enhance their collaborative skills. So i-evaluate natin yung kanilang collaborative learning. Paano ba sila mag-work with a group? How do they learn from a partner? And so on. And finally, we can also assess their collective construction of knowledge. So meaning to say, ano ba yung tingin nila as a whole sa concept na tinuro po natin. So some assessments that we can do, so I'm gonna show some levels of cognitive levels of Bloom's taxonomy, similar to what Professor Mojica has shown earlier. So if you want to assess knowledge, we can give them quizzes, games, and even flashcards. If you want to assess comprehension, pwede po tayong magbigay ng tutorials. They will learn through simulations and animations. Applications, we can ask them essay questions. We can have them do case studies. And finally, yung talagang sa higher order thinking, We can check for their analytical skills, synthesis, tsaka evaluation. We can have them do a portfolio, class presentations, full papers, or even lab reports. We can also think of it as being formative or summative. So, diniscuss din to ni Professor Mojica kanina. So, for example, so formative assessments, we can have them do discussion posts. You can give a prompt. So, wala po itong right or wrong answer. Para siyang open-ended question. But you get a feel of how students react to the topic that you posted. Or, pwede din silang magbigay ng comments to each other. So,
Nagdiligawan na yung dalawa.
So you get to feel, you get an idea po of paano po yung interaction nila, paano po yung pagbigay nila ng feedback. So pwede rin pong gumawa ng journals or blogs and quizzes. Those are also formative assessments. Summative naman po, pwedeng group project. Again, they can do portfolios, online class presentations, and they can even do a poster. Ang maganda po, we always combine formative and summative. So they can do case studies, papers, gamitin nila yung knowledge nila about social media. They can do digital stories. They can put together concept maps, and they can write what we call as reflective journals. So kumbaga, metacognition, paano ba ako natututo, anong natutunan ko, ano pang gusto kong matutunan. So it's more like a journal na pwede nilang i-write up. So kung nakikita nyo, ito pong mga assessments na binigay ko, wala siyang right or wrong answers. So isipin nyo, as a teacher, paano ko siya chechekan, di ba? Para mas marami yata yung trabaho ko. So what we suggest you do is we grade it using what we call as rubrics. So a rubric is a tool that articulates the expectations for an assignment by listing criteria, and for each criteria, describe levels of quality. So I'm going to show you an example. Kailangan meron muna tayong 3 essential features. Meron dapat tayong criteria, ano yung i-assess natin. Meron tayong markers of quality. Ano ba yung best? Ano yung satisfactory? Ano lang yung good? Then finally, paano natin siya isa-score? So I'm showing here a sample of a discussion board rubric. So halimbawa, nag-post kayo ng topic prompt sa inyong learning management system. Let's say, for example, I teach forensics. So kunwari sinabi ko doon na merong case na na-solve recently. What do you think about it? So students will write their thoughts about that, and then other students can also give their comments about that topic. So i-grade ko yon. Paano ba sila nagsulat? So here are some of the criteria. So yung criteria ko would be comprehension, engagement, connections, and writing. Paano ba nila in-expressing sarili nila? Was it coherent? Is it cohesive? Engagement, nag-reply ba sila sa ibang students? Connections, na-connect ba nila yung topic sa examples or sa case? And then writing, maganda pa yung pagkakasulat, naiintindihan ba, wala bang grammatical errors? So those are my markers of quality. And then here are my scores. So ang kagandahan po ng rubrics is that mas madali pong mag-check. Kasi meron ka na po agad criteria, and then ang advantage pa po nito, you are grading consistently across the board. And when students see their grades, they know kung saan silang aspect nagkulang. So that is also a good way to improve for the next one. So since some of the creative assessments for online classes would be more on this kinds of open-ended questions, kailangan po meron tayong magandang rubric. The more detailed the rubric, the better it is for grading. So, pakiisipin nyo, paano ako magsisimula, di ba? Kasi mahirap po magsimula maggumawa ng rubric. So, I'm gonna share a resource with you. This is rubystarforteachers.org, and this is a free tool to help teachers create quality rubrics. Pwede po kayong gumawa ng account. So, I'm gonna show you real quick what the website looks like. So, you can make an account, and then right here, you can type 3 words. So, for example, I want to search a rubric for class presentation. So I just do a search like that. So let's see if it will load. All right, anyway. So isang example doon is ito is actually for a 2nd grade Hebrew immersion classroom. So meron siyang rubrics, meron siyang criteria, meron siyang quality markers, tapos meron pong scoring. So you can adapt this for your courses. I-tweak nyo lang po based on what you want to assess. And then there are other types of rubrics available in this website. So that is one resource that I'm sharing, and this will be available for you to explore as well. May ibibigay pong document at the end of the webinar. So now that we've talked about learning outcomes and then the possible kinds of assessment, what are the strategies now for thinking more creatively about assessments in your online courses? So yung kagandahan po sa online class natin ngayon, parang meron tayong free reign to explore different ways of assessing our students. It can be exciting. Tapos parang meron siyang parang lumalabas yung creativity nating mga professors para gumawa ng assessments na to. So I'm gonna show you 5 tips or strategies kung paano kayo magka-craft ng assessments, and then give some examples along the way. So strategy number 1 is capitalize on digital resources. So what do I mean by that? Yung mga estudyante po natin, nakaharap sila sa computer nila for a long time pag nag-online class. And our computers are powerful sources of information kasi pwede po tayo mag-access ng internet. So we should bank on that and we should take advantage of it. So for example, one thing you can do is you can have your students do like an online scavenger hunt. So pwede kayo magbigay ng prompts, hanapin nila sa internet and so on. Let's say, for example, nagtuturo kayo ng history class. So you can show, let's say, a picture of a church built in the 13th century. So you can ask your students, for example, this church was built in the 13th century. Bakit siya may fortress? Anong meron, bakit ganun yung design ng churches? So students can do a research online. So they can search ano bang meron ng 13th century, ano yung political role ng churches ng 13th century. So mas marami silang ideas na pwedeng pagkunan. Then what you can do is, when you go back to class, they can report on it. So yung pag-report, pwede pong oral habang nasa Zoom sila, or pwede lang i-video yung sarili nila, and then they can turn in a video and have, share it with everyone. So yun yung pong ibang way para po makapitalize natin yung resources. We can use the internet and we can also use different media kung paano po isasubmit yung kanilang work. Another example or strategy is aim for authenticity. So what do I mean by authentic assessments? So ibibigay natin sa estudyante natin yung kumbaga feel kung ano ba yung mangyayari kapag nasa chosen field na ako of work. So for example, let's say you're teaching government or politics, tapos pwede nyo itanong sa mga estudyante nyo, let's say, meron kayong problema ng basura sa barangay ninyo. If you are given the chance to write a letter to a policy maker, what would you write and what's your proposal para ma-solve yung problem? So it also taps into higher order thinking kasi nag-expand yung kumbaga pag-iisip ng mga bata natin. Kumbaga they're thinking outside the box. What if susulat ako sa politician, anong gusto kong sabihin? So that's another way of aiming for authenticity, another way for assessment as well. And then as I mentioned earlier, pwedeng gumawa sila ng paper dito, pwede pong i-present nila sa class, and so on. So there's no right and wrong answer. So wala po silang kopyahan na magaganap. Another strategy is use students' environments and experiences. So gamitin natin yung kanilang tahanan, yung kanilang culture, yung kanilang probinsya. Kasi ang kagandahan po sa online learning, kumbaga parang we are looking into other people's point of view, di ba? So kapag we use students' environments and experiences, we also get to know them more. So one example of this, for example, sa mga, let's say, elementary students. So may COVID tayo ngayon, let's say you can ask them as an assignment, in your house, what do you do to make sure that you don't contract the virus? So pwede mag-video mga estudyante, we have hand sanitizers, we use alcohol, we have a foot bath, nagwa-wash hands kami palagi. Then again, they can share that with the class and everyone can, give their feedback as well. So that's another way, use your students' environment and experiences. Strategy number 4 is to incorporate collaboration. So ito yung medyo mahirap sa online class kasi sa face-to-face class, nagkakaroon tayo ng kumbaga close interaction, we develop community, di ba? So sa online class, medyo mahirap to i-achieve. So dapat we should be extra conscious or we should exert extra effort to build community and connection sa classroom. And one way to achieve that is to incorporate collaboration or group tasks sa ating mga estudyante. So for example, you're teaching a Filipino class, a Filipino subject, pwede niyong sabihin sa Twitter, 4 kayo, magkakagroup kayo, gumawa kayo ng maikling kwento, ilagay niyo sa Twitter. So kanya-kanya silang pag-post ng parts ng stories and kumbaga, nasa social media siya, pwedeng mag-comment yung iba, pwedeng mag-pitch in yung iba, but it's basically something that they put online. So it's also teaching them how to be responsible social media users. So marami kang learning objectives, learning outcomes na na-achieve by simply doing that. But the downside with collaboration is that dapat clear po tayo sa accountability. So I always have my students fill up what I call as a team worksheet. Nakalagay doon, pag hindi ako sumipot sa meeting or hindi ako nag-log in sa Messenger, ano yung consequence, and so on. And I also let my students evaluate themselves. So for example, 50 points yung total points. Let's say 10 points dyan is just for group evaluation. So merong accountability, lahat sila maeengganyo na mag-work together kasi nga i-grade nila yung isa't isa. It also teaches them how to give feedback to their peers in a nice and professional manner. And then finally, use both formative and summative assessments. So gaya ng sinabi ni Professor Mojica kanina at saka ni Dr. Lanorio, formative assessments para ma-check natin yung mga estudyante natin kung naiintindihan pa ba nila. So we can use polls, gaya ng ginawa ni Dr. Chu kanina. We can use polls to see kung ano ba yung level of engagements ng student natin at this point. And then summative assessment, for example, nagtuturo kayo ng, let's say, aging or biologies. Let's say aging. Pwede nyo itanong sa kanila, which of the following factors affect aging? So that's a way of formative assessment. And then you can branch that out into another question, which says, for example, what do you look forward to and not look forward to? What do you do and do not look forward to aging, and why? So how do you see yourself when you're 65 years old? So kumbaga, nakikita rin natin yung thought ng students sa pagtanda nila, interesting in a way kasi kakaiba yung tanong, pero you also get a sense kung paano nila naiintindihan or put together yung subject na tinuturo ninyo. So those are just some strategies that you can use to think about your assessment. So it's not, so nagbigay ako na examples in different courses, you can definitely think of something to do for your own classes. So let's try a creative online assessment right now. Kunwari kayo po yung mga estudyante ko. So I will encourage you right now to grab your cell phones real quick, or if you're using an internet, your laptops, you can just open a new browser. But I'm gonna show you one tool that I use for formative assessment. So marami tayong mga tools available online. So if you attended my webinar before, meron tayo dyan Kahoot, meron Mentimeter, and we also have Edpuzzle, Flipgrid. Ito yung pwedeng video yung submission ng estudyante. Mentimeter is about polling. Today, I'm gonna show you how I use Poll Everywhere. So Poll Everywhere is also an audience response system for polling. So it is interactive, and what I'm gonna use right now, so marami siyang pwedeng gawin. This is also free. Meron siyang free version, meron siyang paid version. I just used the free version. Pwede kang gumawa ng multiple choice polls, pwedeng word cloud, pwedeng Q&A. What I'm going to do right now is a clickable image. So I invite you to go to pollev.com/mlansigan100. So punta po tayo doon. I'm going to give you a few seconds to go to this website. And it's basically asking you where you are right now. So it's pollev.com/mlansigan100. So let's go to that site. So i-click nyo lang po, you can actually expand your screen so you can see your province. I-click nyo lang po kung nasaan kayo. Okay, so we have somebody from Rizal, another one from Rizal. So let's just see where most of our listeners are currently located. Okay, so as you can see, this is a way of assessing also. So pwede nyo baguhin yung tanong. Depende po kung anong klaseng learning outcome yung gusto nyong ma-assess or ma-achieve for that particular topic. Okay. So sa nakikita ko po sa screen, malaki po yung density ng teachers natin sa Laguna, Rizal, Cavite region. Pero wala tayo sa Mindanao region halos today. So we can think as an assessment, maybe do an investigatory project. Is it an accessibility issue? Or hindi ba nakarating sa kanila na may webinar tayo? Ano bang kailangan nila? And so on. So this can be an investigatory project. So what I did there was that I used my students' results and then I branched out. Ang tawag po doon, branching out. Branched out kung ano yung pwedeng assessments na pwede kong gawin. So I can have them do a group project on looking for accessibility issues ng ating mga teachers. I can ask a second question, for example, anong mode of teaching yung gagawin nyo this coming semester? Hybrid, fully online, or fully distance learning? So pag nakuha nyo yung data na yon, then you can do something about it as well. So it's basically trying to extract something from what your students provided you. It's also a good way of crafting your assessments. Okay. All right. So babalik lang po ako dun sa aking presentation. So by the way, ang poll everywhere po, you can make it anonymous. So right now I made it anonymous, but you can also make it in such a way na magre-register pa yung students. I-write down nila yung names nila. So you can make this a graded assessment. You will know who answered what question. You will know their answers as well. So you can extract that sa reports, and there you have your very short formative assessment. Okay. So yung mga dinescribe ko po is mostly for students of internet and access and technology access. So what if the student has no access to internet or technology? How can we still assess their learning? So we still have to go back to our learning objectives. Ano ba yung gusto nating ma-achieve nila at the end of the semester? So I have 2 suggestions on how you can do this to students who have no internet or access to a device. So one, you can consider performance-based projects. Or you can use conversations as oral defense. So ito pwede pong gawin via phone, or kung maayos na po yung sitwasyon, pwede pong, let's say, pumunta sa inyong classroom with social distancing at doon mag-present yung ating estudyante. Okay? So ang performance-based project, this is a type of project that measures the student's ability to apply the skills and knowledge learned from a unit or units of study. So students complete a task that closely mirrors the responsibilities of a professional. So ano mga examples itong klase ng performance-based project? So for example, art student, pwede siya gumawa ng portfolio. So gagawa siya ng mga artworks niya, i-compile niya, then submit that to you at the end of the semester. Okay? Kung halimbawa science students, you can have the student do a research proposal. So hindi siya gagawa ng experiment, magagawa lang siya ng proposal. That's another summative assessment as well. Okay? So other examples would be, as I mentioned, student portfolios, research paper. They can do arts, crafts, and even models depending on ano pong subjects yon. They can do a capstone project or an investigatory project. They can do a digital storyboard. And they can do reflective journals as well. Okay. For oral defense, this is also, they can do a presentation or they can engage in an oral explanation of their final product. So kumbaga parang i-defend nila, explain nila bakit ito yung kinalabasan ng project nila, and so on. And this can be done via phone kung hindi po pwedeng pumunta yung ating estudyante sa ating mga eskwelahan. So yun po yung mga tips ko on how you can craft your creative assessments. And just some final tips and takeaways. Use technology to help students interact with course materials in new and creative ways. So I've shown you different strategies which are applicable to different types of courses and classes. So gamitin niyo po yung technology na meron tayo. Incorporate audio, video, social media, creative research techniques, and more to help students build valuable skills they can use in the workplace and beyond. So sa mga estudyante po natin, hindi po dapat limited tayo sa academic skills. Dapat i-trainin po natin sila sa social skills, interactive skills, collaborative skills, kasi ito po yung life skills na gagamitin nila when they actually join the workforce. So pwede silang mag-submit ng audio submission, pwede magbigay ng videos, pwede silang gumawa ng social media blogs, and so on. Then finally, take advantage of convenient and far-reaching tools. So, andyan po yung Facebook. Pwede natin gamitin ng Facebook for this. Sabi ni Dr. Bugayong kanina, itap natin yung ating radio or television para makapag-communicate tayo sa mga estudyante. And yung, obviously, ating mga cell phones as well. And yung isa kong gustong i-quote dito is from an article that I've read on creative methods of assessment. So, ang assessment po, hindi lang siya dapat limited sa exams. Kasi pag sinabing exam, mahirap, matagal, mahaba, di ba? Parang kinakabahan. So, we can make our assessments creative. Parang students natin may excite din sila. So, we can make our assessments such that it can be an opportunity for exciting, focused forays into real-life teamwork or collaboration, problem solving, and knowledge building. So yung final tip ko po is para naman sa ating mga magulang because we're talking about assessments, okay? So alam po natin, yung mga anak natin, gusto natin maka-A sila, gusto natin perfect lagi sila, gusto natin the best for them, right? Pero sana po, wag po tayo ang sasagot ng kanilang mga assessments, wag po tayong gagawa ng projects nila kasi hindi po kayo yung naka-enroll, sila po. So ang gawin natin, wag naman din po dapat neglect, 'di ba? Na okay, bahala ka na, diyan ka na lang. Kasi ayaw naman natin sila ang bumagsak. Kapag nagkamali, i-guide po natin, hayaan natin silang matuto sa kanilang mga mistakes and then they can improve for the next assessments and so on. So, ang advice ko po is tamang gabay, tamang pag-alalay, at saka tamang pagsubaybay. So, with that, kung may questions po kayo, well, I think we're ready to entertain questions. Maraming salamat po ulit sa inyong lahat.
Ayan naman, maraming salamat and that ends the lectures by our speakers. Meron lang akong isang comment dito gusto kong basahin. This is from Von Ryan Ebron. Ang lupit talaga ng webinar series ng KKP-ST. Very thorough and practical. Hindi boring, all in one. The webinars greatly helped me understand how to handle remote learning. Thank you very much. Yan. So, marami pa po tayong ibang ng mga magagandang comments na natatanggap. But for now, I would like to give the stage to Dr. Major Aguila to facilitate our question and answer portion.
Good morning po sa lahat. So, ganito po ulit yung procedure natin. Yung pong gustong magtanong live, pwede nyo pong i-raise yung hand nyo para ma-recognize ko po kayo. At the same time, pwede din po kayong mag-submit ng question through the Zoom chat box. Or for those na nasa YouTube, you can always submit your questions dun sa comment section and it will be read. So, meron po bang gustong magtanong live? I think at the moment, wala. Pero, kinolate po namin lahat ng mga questions na nilagay nyo nung nag-register po kayo. And maybe I'll ask some of them while we're waiting for the questions. So, one question would be, so any one of you could answer, how can assessment be considered smart? Anyone? Sir Mojica, Sir Elmer, can you read me? Can you hear me?
Anong tanong?
How can an assessment be considered smart?
Smart. So an assessment, I would say, can be considered smart if it reflects doon sa estudyante kung natutunan talaga niya yung dapat niyang matutunan. But the problem is now, as I show you in the cartoons, mostly us teachers, we just do our part and we seldom get feedback from our students. Usually, ganun tayo mostly as a teacher. But one thing that we learn, for the learning engagement to be pretty much better, you need to get feedback from your students. Kasi usually, I think, for college teachers, lahat tayo, ang assessment natin is just exam. Right? I mean, engineering, physics, I think 2 or 3 dreaded exams. That's all. You live or die by the exam. But this pandemic, I think you cannot apply what we call do that concept na lagi na lang summative assessment ang gagawin natin. So the way that we can do it is you chunk down the topic, and each of them be creative in asking question. So hindi na pwede yung objective na question by this time. The way that for me, we're still lucky because we have the internet infrastructure. But for you there in the Philippines, it will be a little bit challenging, but I think it's capable. Okay? Maging what we call creative lang yung mga teacher. So kung paano gagawin yung exam. I have a friend who's teaching in Zamboanga. Ang ginagawa niya, meron siyang parang version, different versions ng exam para hindi naman magkopyahan yung mga what we call estudyante niya. And he said, kung mag-usap man daw yung mga student, assured siya na iba-iba yung mga sagot nila kasi hindi naman pare-pareho yung tanong. So hopefully that answer that question.
Okay, thank you po. How about the others? Do you have an additional input?
I think for me, you consider assessment smart if it answers your learning objectives. So if it meets the learning outcomes, then I consider that as, meeting the goal. I mean, simple answer.
I agree. Yes. Pag na-achieve yung learning outcomes, yun yung magiging kumaga smart kind of assessment. As simple as that.
Okay. So I think we have several questions in the Zoom chat box. I will give the floor to Joseph to address that to the speakers. Joseph.
All right, thank you, Ma'am Dang. Okay, yeah, we have a lot of questions in the chat box as well as in the YouTube po, sa YouTube comment section. Pero equally, ang dami rin pong compliments. So congratulations po sa ating mga speakers for a very informative and comprehensive webinar. All right, so let me read some questions here. Dito muna po sa Zoom group chat. Okay, this one is from Miss Presi Enahe. We have differentiated instruction. Do we have differentiated assessment? So, sino po ang pwede nating matanong? Makasagot po for this question. Differentiated assessment. This actually caught my attention. Kaya ito yung binasa ko una. Anyone po?
I'll try to answer that question. So can you repeat that? So differentiated assessment, differentiated instruction, differentiated assessment.
Yes.
So as always po, it will boil down to your learning outcomes po eh. Kung kahit magkakaiba kayo ng modes of instruction or differentiated instructions, pero pare-pareho kayo ng learning outcomes, ma-align nyo po yung assessments nyo in that manner.
Mm-hmm. Yes po. All right, thank you, Dr. Lansigan. Yeah. Yes, Sir Meng.
So, in this pandemic, one of the aspects that shifted is the shift to this so-called teaching method. From a one-size-fits-all, naging individualized and differentiated
Pambadi nga siya.
Ang nangyari. So, it's up to you to develop some sort of a differentiated assessment. If you already know the student na may kakayahan naman silang or magaling sila, so maybe you can give them more challenging type of question, okay? Kaysa doon sa student na medyo academically is weak, okay? So I think you have to apply some sort of equity sa pag-assess nyo dito. Although the learning outcomes will still be the determining factor. Kasi ang nangyari ngayon sa shift ng natin, yung pedagogies na tinatawag, you have to also consider yung kung ano ba talaga ang objective mo or yung learning outcomes na gusto mong matutunan ng estudyante doon sa isang sa course na tinuturuan mo.
Alright, thank you, Sir Meng. Meron pa po bang gustong mag-add sa ating speakers? Okay, so siguro po we entertain some more questions. I have here a couple of questions concerning assessment integrity. So mukhang ito po ay directed kay Ma'am Au. Okay, so thanks for, this one is from Mr. Robin Donquillo. Thanks for a wonderful webinar. I just have a question on how to secure assessment integrity for an offline learning environment. Okay, kasi I think that is the case for most of the areas here in the Philippines, that especially yung nag-opt sa modular mode, okay, of learning and assessment. So how do we ensure that an offline learning environment has an ensured integrity in terms of assessment? Meron din pong isang related question from Miss Maria Felrose Monte, nakat yung name niya, Montefal something. Okay. Hello po, ask ko lang po regarding sa cheating issue, paano po madedetect na cheating yung nangyari sa online quiz or exam kung ang reason naman ng slow response ay slow internet connection. So these are actually challenges here in the Philippines. So
Opo.
yes,
So,
Ma'am Au.
maganda pong question yan. So sa unang question po, kung modular learning, paano po natin ma-preserve ang integrity ng exam, okay, ng assessment? Sa tingin ko po, kailangan meron pong testing center kung pwede po. Tapos po sa testing center, pwede pong mag-sign, let's say yung pupunta doon ng student, kung possible lang po. Pero dapat po meron ding nakaset na date and time beforehand kung na ganito po yung exam. So kailangan po ng proctor. So pwede po siguro kung merong teacher doon, magsa-certify po siya na nag-take ang estudyante ng exam na wala pong cheating na nangyari. Isa pong way yun. So sa bahay naman po, pwede po siguro mag-sign ang parents na sinecertify niya na yung anak niya po ang gumawa without any help. So mahirap po kasi talagang i-prevent 100% ang cheating. So sa pangalawa naman pong tanong nyo, yung nga po ba yung pangalawang tanong?
Ano po, kapag ang reason naman daw, halimbawa you're proctoring the exam online, medyo faulty po ang connection. So, ayun po.
So, nangyari po yan sa akin sa isa kong student na mabagal daw po yung connection. Pero kasi po smart po yung canvas namin. So, nadidetect po kung ano po yung time, kung kailan nag-login. Opo. So, malalaman po namin kung talagang nagsasabi po ng totoo yung students kasi naka-record po yung pag-login niya doon po sa aming canvas. Sa Philippine setting, naku, hindi ko po alam kung paano yan sagutin. Elmer, may idea ka ba?
Yung LMS kasi namin, usually, meron kaming option doon, kahit mag-drop yung internet, hindi siya i-consider sa exam time. So yung nawala na time, hindi siya i-credit. So makukuha ng estudyante yung time na nawala dahil mahina ang internet. Now, sa Philippine settings, I think kung hindi reliable yung internet, wag na kayong mag-online. Unless meron kayong LMS na merong features na kung mag-drop yung internet, hindi rin makikredit yung time na nawala dahil slow yung internet. Okay?
So, ako po. Dito din po pumapasok yung survey na na-mention ni Dr. Lanorio. So, yun yung una po ng kailangan gawin natin ninyo, sa mga estudyante nyo, alamin ko ano ang setting na meron sila. So kung halimbawa, majority po ng estudyante ninyo ay wala naman talagang access o mahina talagang access sa internet, di ang assessment po na gagawin nyo para sa kanila ay hindi po dapat based sa internet. So para ma-prevent na po yun. Kasi wag na po kayong dumating dun sa pagkakataon na mangyari pa. So kung alam nyo naman na sa area na yon, pagka-survey nyo sa kanila, survey siguro pwedeng by mail, pwede nyo tanungin sila beforehand ng klase. Pero kung alam nyo na kung ano yung setting nila, kaya po importante po talaga na malaman nyo yung accessibility at magkaroon po kayo muna ng initial survey ng kung anong meron po yung estudyante nyo.
Okay. So, thank you po sa ating speakers. Um, from the Zoom group chat po, ang dami po nagtatanong about dun sa mga materials ng ating speakers. So, for everybody's information po, this will be made available to all of you. Later po, ibabanggitin po ni Dr. Israel sa part ng closing kung paano niyo po ma-access yung materials na i-share ng ating mga speakers. Okay?
And also, I would just like to share that the video is recorded on YouTube. So, pwede silang bumalik palagi dun sa PhilSci Hub YouTube
Alright.
to watch it.
So, the video will be premiered sa PhilSci Hub and pinipremiere din po namin siya sa KKP-ST page. So, thank you po. Okay, so ito po, some questions from YouTube naman po. Ito mukhang sa teachers talaga to. What strategy can teachers employ to avoid being overwhelmed with grading, assessing task-based, or performance output?
May sagot po ako dyan. So para po hindi tayo masyado maging overwhelmed, pwede po tayong gumawa ng mga group assessments. So halimbawa po, in my class, I have 48 students. So I have them, form groups of 4 students. So kukunti na lang po yung checkan ko. Instead of 48 students ang checkan ko, ilang groups na lang yung gagawin kong grading. So it's easier. And then also, you can use rubrics. So halimbawa, magpapa-assess kayo using essays, gumamit po tayo ng rubrics para mas mabilis po, mas madali yung pag-check.
Meron din po akong gustong i-share. Meron pong
Yes, Ma'am Jocy.
Grade Scope. Libre po siyang app and automatic po yung grading. Pwede rin po sa Google Form na ilagay niyo po kung ano yung correct answer. Automatically, pwede rin pong gradean ng Google Form.
Okay, thank you, Ma'am Jocy. Some more answers po? Meron pa po bang gusto maidagdag?
I would suggest you work with the other colleagues of yours. So you divide the work.
Okay, sir.
Just like what we did in UP, like. Yes,
Opo, ganun kami, yes. In one course, we are working with, we are dividing the task actually po. Ayun po. Pero I think it has something to do with striking a balance between yung type ng question. Kasi kung objective type, madali siyang i-correct using apps. But if it is a more of a subjective or essay type question, so we really need to do a bit of reading. Hindi nga a bit reading and correcting, di po ba? Ayun po. So, siguro po we have some questions that have to be or need to be raised live. Dr. Aguila, Ma'am Daang. Ma'am Daang.
Nakamute ka, Daang.
Sorry about that. Meron po bang gustong magtanong live?
Ay, meron ako nakita nag-raise hand kanina. Nawala ba?
Nawala eh.
Okay. From the registration question. Ayun, may nagsasalita.
Sige po. Pakisabi na lang po yung name nyo sa Kapo Affiliation.
Good morning. I am Amanda Hoven from Quezon City. Still an applicant for Teacher 1 position and hoping to be hired next year. My question is that yung rubric po ba is applicable for all the class activities, online or modular platform? Thank you.
Opo, applicable po yung rubrics. Kayo po kasing gagawa ng criteria ninyo. So depende po sa kind of assessment na gagawin niyo sa class niyo, kung essay siya, class presentation, performance, oral defense. Kayo po yung gagawa ng criteria at saka po ng mga quality metrics ninyo, at saka po ng scoring. So pwede po siyang gamitin whether it's online or in modular form.
Thank you, Ma'am Michele.
You're welcome po.
Although, Shelly, di ba may website kang sinabi?
So yung Ruby
it
Star.
has recommendations naman, di ba?
Oo, meron. So itatype nyo lang dun sa search ko anong klaseng assessment. Tapos marami kayong options, pipili kayo doon. Then you can tweak it. Depende sa assessment na gagawin nyo tsaka sa course.
Okay. There's a question actually. Okay, Joven, thank you. During the registration, how to assess performance involving laboratory or psychomotor skill. I think this is in relation to having a modular mode for learning now. So how to assess performance involving laboratory or psychomotor skill? Do you have suggestions?
So I can take that. So
Yes,
that's a
please.
really hard question, but it all boils down to your learning objective. So say for example, sa lab, if your learning objective is for students to be able to learn how to pipette, then maybe sa module nyo that you send out. So it depends kung online yung pag-send or pag-deliver, it's going to be easy to see a student hold up a pipette, right? As a technique. Pero for the modular part, then that's going to be a bit tricky. But you can incorporate something like them taking a picture maybe. I don't know, sort of limited, but they can hold up something like a piece of straw, diba, that resembles a pipette. Because if the skill is to, say for example, have them suck in something through a piece of device, diba, yun yung learning goal mo, then you have to mimic something back home that they have that would actually help them perform the skill. And how to, I guess, what do you call this one? Provide evidence for that. Maybe they can take a picture that they can send along the module that they will bring back. That's a possibility, or a video. Pero since limited nga, hindi mo alam kung anong klaseng device ang meron sila. I think that's one option. But you know, that's really a hard thing to assess using the modular form of delivery.
May tanong po ako.
Sino po sila?
Si Mr. Roderick Belen. Teacher po sa public school.
Opo.
My question is, paano makatutulong yung parents sa assessment ng bata if yung i-guide lang nila yung anak nila or yung learners, on the spot nakita nilang medyo mali yung answer ng bata, pwede na bang i-correct nung parent instantly yon? In what way? Paanong paraan niya pwedeng, ano kayang magandang paraan para madali niyang mai-guide nang parang hindi nalilis yung, parang siya na yung nagsasagot doon sa questions. That's all my question.
I think I can answer that question. So siguro pwede kayong gumawa ng low stakes assessment na lang. So pag kumbaga hindi siya isang exam na worth 100 points, siguro quizzes muna yung ibigay natin, and then give explicit instructions sa students, and then sa parents na pwede mong sabihin na pwede mo silang tulungan at this sa part na to kasi low stakes assignment lang siya. Pero kapag high stakes assessment na siya, ibang usapan na yon. So dapat hayaan natin din yung mga bata na matuto sila on their own kasi sila din naman yung magbe-benefit from that. So for low stakes assessment, walang problema. Pwedeng tumulong yung parents.
Okay, thank you for that.
So meron po akong...
So Sherry, ibig mo sabihin, pag gumawa ng module, naka-specify na doon na parents can help you. Parang
maganda siguro kung gano'n, para kumbaga hindi nila ma-feel na ay nandadaya ba ako, nag-cheat ba kami, hindi. So para kumbaga gagawin nilang low stakes para kahit mali lahat, okay lang. Tama lahat, mas lalong okay, di ba? So parang mag-work together yung parents at that part. Pwede lang i-specify sa module, you can work with your parents on this part of the assessment.
Yeah. That's good.
That's good.
We have one more.
You're welcome.
Thank you. We have one more question from Robin Donkilio. Robin Donkilio. Ikaw ba yung nagtanong kanina? Naka-raise pa kasi yung hand mo.
No, I think it's a different person.
This is a different. Okay, Robin. You can ask your question now. Robin Donkilio.
Robin Donkilio.
Naka-unmute na siya eh. Kailangan na lang niyang magsalta.
Baka nahiya si sir.
Or baka na-click lang yung raised hand.
Ayan
na ba?
And then we have Helen Nepomuceno.
Helen Nepomuceno?
Ask ko lang po, paano namin i-assess? Kasi public school is mostly modular. So, paano namin i-assess yung modular? And, paano namin sila bibigyan ng grades? Ganon. Para sa modular na mga bata.
So sa modules po ninyo, isama na po ninyo yung mga quizzes nyo doon, yung mga projects ninyo, para po pwedeng at the end of the school year, pwede nyo pong i-collect o pwede po kayong mag-schedule na, for example, on this day, i-drop off po ninyo sa school, and so isasama nyo na po sa modules niyo yung mga assessment packets.
Okay po, ma'am. Thank you po.
Tsaka dapat po may regular feedback. So halimbawa, pag sinend out nyo po yung modules nyo, wag lang pong sa pinakadulo na lang ng semester nyo kukunin yung response ng mga estudyante. So kung maaari po sana kung makukuha nyo na yung school mismo, yung mga drop-off points ay accessible sa mga bata, more feedback is better. So say for example, sa mga modules nyo meron kayong pre-test, merong midterm, meron din post. I mean, that's the ideal one kasi ayaw nyo naman na bibigyan nyo sila lang, ang tawag ko ngayon, busy packet. Here you go. Sagutan nyo lahat dito tapos magkita na lang tayo sa pinakadulo kung saan hindi mo alam kung ano na nangyari in between. So maganda na may feedback ka in between at paano incorporate yung feedback, pwede mong sabihin sa kanila na at this point, itong sasagutan nyo na essay, kukolektahin ko sa gantong point or itong low stakes test na katulad nga sabi ni Dr. Lansigan, pipick upin ko at this time. But you have to have little types of things that the kids can do and that you can get so that you'll know if they're learning the learning objectives that you set for them to do. So yeah.
So mahalaga yung schedule, no? Dapat naka-schedule talaga kung kailan sila magsasubmit ng assessment.
Thank you.
So
frequent check-ins with the student.
So
Mr. Chris Marquez.
Hello po. Hello po.
Yes po. Ask na po kayo ng question.
Okay po. I would just like to ask, since hindi natin nakikita yung mga learners natin habang ginagawa nila yung assessment, how can we validate the reliability of that assessment if we teachers cannot see kung ano yung parents ba yung sumasagot or yung bata? How can we validate the reliability of that assessment? Yun lang po.
Well, you can ask, the setup that I know sa elementary tsaka sa high school dyan, pupunta sila sa mga munisipyo or di kaya sa barangay hall. So if you're in doubt with the student, you ask the student to go to that place and do the assessment himself.
Okay po.
So ano po bang form of delivery po ba? Online po ba yan or yung modular?
Since sa public school namin po, sa public school ako,
modular.
Mostly po, modular po. Modular.
Oo, so talagang napaka-importante na makakuha kayo ng tulong na your other set of pair of eyes ba? Kasi kung wala yon, mahirap talaga na maging reliant ka na okay, student ba talagang gumawa nito o hindi. So online, iba. Kasi you can set a lot of steps to mitigate yung cheating. May mga ways to do that. So ang goal talaga overall at some point, sana hopefully sa Philippines, is to start maybe modular and then have an infrastructure at some point that will allow...
So mag-migrate tayo po from modular to online.
Mag-migrate tayo. Kaya katulad ng Google Classroom, which is free, diba? Kung lahat sana, free naman siya eh. So you have to utilize something like that. And kulang na lang ang access ng internet ng mga bata. So kung yun lang, yung problema natin ay masusolusyonan talaga kung halimbawa meron tayong infrastructure. Katulad sa amin dito, nung nagkaroon ng pandemic, madaling mag-migrate from something that's paper to online kasi may existing infrastructure na. So I think that has to be addressed as well on top of everything. Na, okay, we can do modular, but we can't do modular forever. We have to think about ways of transferring or putting our technology into something that's more reliable for our students. So,
Yes po, even in online learning po, di ba, mahirap pa rin i-validate if yung estudyante pa rin yung gumagawa ng mga answer kasi
right, but may mga steps to help. I think it's smaller compared to if the deliver is modular. Meron pa rin. You can't really prevent it 100%. But marami ng technology na pwedeng gawin. Pero kung hindi natin ma-address yon at some point and we still continue on and do modular form, then syempre marami talagang kailangan pa nating i-answer na questions, talagang magiging mas masakit pa sa ulo actually. So, kesa sa mag-isip na lang ng paraan na gawin nating online yung learning ng mga bata. Kasi at some point, this is not going to end, at some point, di ba, hindi naman tayo lahat, hindi titigil to. At some point, kailangan talaga nilang mag-migrate sa online. So, I think that should be the direction that we should be headed towards too.
Okay po, thank you for answering.
Ma'am Daang, can I add?
Yes.
Si Marty to. Ayan.
Okay.
So, sa high school and elementary, alam naman natin na medyo mahihirapan tayo sa modular na delivery. So, ang gusto ko sanang gawin natin is malaking bagay yung PTA, yung Parents and Teachers Association, and we really need a helping hand. So, at the early start of the class, siguro kailangang i-meet natin yung mga parents para we encourage them to be our extra eye, sabi nga ni Ma'am Trixie, sa pagpapa-deliver ng mga assessment. Kasi pag sinabi mo naman yung mga parents na sila yung parang mag-guide sa mga students nila, and yung parents should not be the one answering the questions. They should be leading the students to the correct answer, not really answering the question. So siguro at the start of the semester or at the start of classes, pwedeng magpa-meeting po muna kayo sa mga parents kung ano yung role nila at napakahalaga ng role nila para sa assessment na gagawin nyo, especially if it's modular. Yun lang po. Thank you.
Hello po. Pwede po bang mag-add?
Umaga po.
Another question po.
Wait lang po. Sino po yung unang nagsalita yung pwede po bang mag-add?
Ako po. Ako po.
Sino
Sir
po
Marquez.
yung ako po?
Jack Chris Marquez po.
Okay, yung nagtanong kanina. Okay, sir, kayo po ulit.
Since we are using Facebook as a means of communication sa ating mga bata, but the Facebook has a community standard restrictions na dapat hanggang age 13 lang yung dapat gumamit. Do we have to follow that community standards of the Facebook, since Facebook is the main communication system for us to talk with the parents and the students, especially for elementary and grade 7 students?
Anyone can answer that?
So maybe you can ask the parents also to create the account of the kids, right? So kung pass the the age requirement. And I don't know, so kung 13 yung cutoff, anyone younger than that should have some sort of parent to create the account. So
I have a 5-year-old kid, and tama yung sabi ni Marty, kailangan nga i-ano yung PTA dito. And ang mangyayari nga, parang naka-enroll din ako online kasama yung anak ko. Kasi during the time na mag-ano siya, hindi naman niya kayang i-set up mag-isa eh. So it's either me or my son wants to go attend in person. So most of the time, I'm the one that stays here because I just need to report once a week in my class for an in-person lab class. So I think kung meron man mga legalities, let's say the use of Facebook, then we have to tap the parents of the students.
Okay. So ngayon po talaga yung panahon na dapat involve ang parents sa kanilang education. So, yung isang kanina na nagsasalita, is it Diane De Castro Rivera?
Hello po,
Diane?
ako po. Hello po, good.
Yes. Yes, Diane, you can ask your question or comment maybe if you have.
Ma'am, good morning po. Nag-raise hand lang po ako, hindi po ako, parang ibang teacher po 'yon, pero
Okay,
tatanong ko
sige.
lang.
Kung meron ka ng tanong ngayon, you can ask it.
Sige po, ma'am, salamat po.
Oo.
Ma'am, bali tatanong ko lang po, any suggestion po regarding po, halimbawa natapos na po yung assessment na pinagawa po natin dun sa bata, ngayon po ay medyo hindi niya po na-reach yung mastery level. Ano po kaya yung possible solution for that?
So na-assess na siya at fortunately
Bumagsak siya.
kinulang.
So ang tanong po, saan part po yung assessment na yon? Nasa gitna po ba or nasa dulo or nasa umpisa? So kaya po importante na merong before, middle, or after, more frequent assessments kasi ayaw mo naman na mangyari yun sa dulo kung saan wala ka nang pwedeng magawa. So kung yun ay nasa medyo umpisa, pwede pang makorect, di ba? So kung nasa end na, then probably that needs to be repeated, you know. So kailangan po yung consistent assessments all throughout. Hindi lang yung one big. So kaya ko po tinanong kung nasaan pong part ng yung assessment na yun dun sa overall picture. Ano pong
Ma'am, regarding po dun sa modular po kasi, usually po, after po kasi ng isang lesson, saka po namin marireceive ulit yung mga na-accomplish ng bata. So, yun po.
So, ilang lessons po ba yung pinapadala nyo? Lahat na po ba yon? So, sa isang module, di ba, may pwedeng maraming lessons?
Halimbawa po, example na lang po, per quarter po. O kaya per chapter po.
Weekly.
So ang tanong ko po, limited po ba kayo doon? May sinusundan po ba kayo na ganun po dapat lahat ang kailangan gawin?
Sige po.
Kung hindi naman po ganun, kung wala naman pong patakaran na ganun po dapat lahat ang gawin, maaari po kayong maglagay ng sarili niyo pong assessment in between. So ang tanong lang naman doon, gaano nyo, alam kong matrabaho, pero kung gusto po natin talaga matuto yung mga estudyante, talagang we should care enough to put something like that so that we'll get enough feedback po. So kung hindi naman po kayo limited sa pwede nyong ilagay, pwede kayo maglagay ng assessment in between po bago yung mismong, yung major assessment sa dulo na summative assessment. Formative assessments are also important. Lahat yun, maliliit patungo dun sa pinakamalaki. So, suggestion ko lang po. So, kung wala naman sinusundan, okay lang mag-deviate. Diba?
Sige po, ma'am. Salamat po.
Add ko lang yung sagot ni Trixie.
Yes, sir.
Usually kasi at the beginning, pag nagbigay kayo ng module, babalik sa inyo, doon pa lang makikita nyo na sino yung magaling at hindi magaling. So, I would suggest, tutukan nyo yung mga hindi magaling. Okay? Because what happened in the end, kung talagang hindi sila talaga tawag dito, hindi talaga umabot doon sa kung ano man yung sinet ninyo para pumasa yung bata, kailangan mag-remedial, which is additional work also on your part. So at least habang maaga, ma-assess nyo na kung ano yung kakayahan ng bata at matulungan agad, bigyan ng reinforcement, additional maybe activities para at least kahit pa paano umangat naman yung kaalaman niya.
Saka meron
Pwede po mag-add?
Okay, sige.
Sino po sila?
Si Mr. Roderick Belen po, teacher po sa elementary din. Actually po, doon sa tanong isang nanay o isang babae, pwede po tayo siguro, di ba, meron tayong tinatawag na yung individual monitoring plan. So, from the time on na nakita na natin yung assessment medyo hindi maganda yung pinupuntahan ng assessment or yung sagot ng bata or nung kanyang ginawa. So, katulad ng sinabi ni Sir kanina, from that on, maaga pa lang, makikita na natin na hindi siya katulad ng ibang learner na madaling makaintindi or makakuha ng tanong. So, kaya nga may tinatawag tayong individual monitoring plan. From doon pa lang, pwede na natin maiplano at mag-shift tayo into more conducive na activity sheet na pwede nating gawing intervention para makakope up yung bata. Yun lang po, sinare ko lang po yan. Salamat.
Meron din po
Thank you
akong
po.
Salamat din po.
Sino po ito?
Ay,
Si Ma'am Au ay merong gustong idagdag, Ma'am Daang.
Ma'am Au.
So in that case po, sa ganun pong situation, dapat po talaga involve yung parents. Bakit po ba nag-fail ang bata? Nag-aaral po ba siya talaga? Or baka naman po hindi. Hindi po siya nag-aral kaya po siya nag-fail. So kailangan po may communication sa parents.
Okay.
Yung aking naisip.
Okay.
Hindi po natin alam, nag-aral siya, bumagsak, or hindi siya nag-aral, kaya siya bumagsak. Parang ganun po.
Talaga pong mahalaga yung role ng parent para matulungan yung anak niya. Dahil kung walang guidance talaga, pababayaan lang natin, walang mangyayari sa bata. Hindi sila makaka-cope up sa situation ngayon. That's all.
Okay. So thank you po. Joseph?
Okay,
May questions
thank you.
pa ba from Zoom or YouTube?
Actually, madami pa. So I think we need to trim it down na kasi it's almost noon and midnight na po sa ating sa area ng ating speakers. But several questions here has something to do with the role of the parents. So siguro i-relate ko na lang doon sa mga sinagot na kanina. I think may isa kasing tanong dito, paano po yung students who are really struggling in science and parents cannot help them since they cannot speak and read English. So I think the role of the parent po siguro is a mediator between the student and the teacher. Ito po yung current na problema ng aking anak. Not necessarily kayo po ang kung nahihirapan din po kayo na tulungan yung i-relay po natin sa teachers. Tama po ba yung strategy na ganon? Siguro po sa mga primary na students, grades 1 and 2 and 3, baka kaya pa po. Okay, but if it is going to be on a higher grade level, so the parents would be acting more of a mediator or parang channel of communication between the student and the parent. Ito po yung isang question from Miss Amorel Sarmiento. This is from YouTube, I think. YouTube. I'm just curious, since most of our speakers are chemistry experts, how do you plan po to do assessments for learning outcomes requiring lab work? Ayun po. And in relation to that, I'm just worried of the leniency SHED is encouraging us to give to our college students. Baka po kasi it might affect the quality of instruction and assessment natin. It might compromise our aim to achieve excellence. Sa UPLB po ba ay allowed? Siguro sagutin ko lang po muna sa UPLB. For this coming semester po, some laboratory courses will not be offered. Ang i-offer lang po namin na laboratory courses ay yung kaya pong i-offer remotely. But for laboratory courses po na talagang kailangan ng physical presence in the lab, hindi po muna namin siya i-offer this per semester. So may we hear from our resource persons po about the laboratory work.
Mauna yung nag-hold na ng klase this week.
Wala pa, lecture pa lang.
So ano po kaya ang strategy natin?
Sa amin, we are asked to do in-person class. But following CDC guidelines, we can only accommodate 25% of the room capacity. So in my lab, which is fortunately can accommodate at most 15 students, ang capacity ng room namin ay 25%. Ang capacity is 24, so 25, that's equivalent to 6. Luckily, I have 12 students. So ang gagawin namin, may rotation sila. So I asked them to choose a partner, and every week they can alternate with one another to do the experiment. And to build community among them, I told them they are in charge of the data of their partner. So if ever hindi available yung partner, yung isang partner bahala kung gusto niya siya lahat gumawa, fine with me. Okay? Ang hindi gagawa, kasi meron din kaming request na baka merong mga health problem or may mga kasama sa bahay na mga magulang na may health problem, merong silang additional work kung hindi sila makakagawa ng in-person lab. So yun lang yung in-person namin sa laboratory, but in the lecture, we will go virtual. Pero ang name of the game ngayon dito sa US colleges and university, matira matibay. Sino ang huling mag-ship sa online? 100%.
Ako naman, share ko kasi kami naman, kung sina Sir Elmer is face-to-face sila, kami naman purely online yung labs namin. So what are we doing to assess yung mga estudyante? So we are doing two things. So yung una, yung iba naming, yung isang professor namin, nag-record siya ng sarili niya doing the lab experiment step by step, tapos nagbigay ng data sa students, and then they make a lab report from that. Yung isa naman namin ginawa is we subscribe to, I think it's Pivot, yung tawag dun sa software. So we subscribe to that, and it's a virtual lab. So parang yung mga students, magkiklik sila pag magtatitrate sila, may ikiklik sila para magpo-pour ng acid, isa-stop nila kapag pink na, then they can record their data, and then gagawa din sila ng lab report. So those are the two things that we're doing for virtual labs.
Okay, do we still have responses
pwede
po?
may gusto ko i-add. So
Yes,
sa
Ma'am
akin
Jocy.
naman, ang ginagawa ko, nire-record ko na yung buong lab, and then papasok lang yung estudyante para sa mga learning objective na kailangan ko makita. So same with Dr. Mojica, meron kaming limitations, 6 lang ang pwedeng papasukin at a time. And kung makikita niyo yung labs namin, talagang marami kaming hoods, and nililimit namin yung time na nasa lab yung estudyante. So kung kailangan ay separatory funnel lang, they will just come in for 5 minutes.
At saka, Joseph, plug ko lang. I have
Yes, sir.
webinar na hindi ko sa ibang organization you can watch a webinar about designing experiments for laboratory class there in the Philippines. I gave it in Southern Luzon State University. Punta kayo sa webpage na tinype ko sa chat. I have the webinars there. Some of them are available, the link. So I think it can be helpful for you there, especially if you're preparing for the new normal. Because this is my 50th webinar, and this is the last because may klase na kami sa Monday.
Mabenta talaga si Sir sa mga webinar. Salamat po sa responses. Well, if I may share po yung ginawa dito sa UPLB, kasi we're actually planning about this a couple of months na. We were actually asked to redesign our programs. Ano pa ibig sabihin? I think this is more applicable sa college po. Since hindi po mag-o-offer ng ibang lab courses, including foundation lab courses, so nagkaroon po kami ng rearrangement of courses na iti-take ng mga bata sa mga darating na semester. So that's one strategy that we took here. Kaya maiipod po talaga yung mga courses, kasi yung mga may lab talaga, especially sa mga technical courses talaga, higher courses na laboratory talaga po ang main activity ng course, ay ayun po, ini-schedule namin on a latter part on the high hopes na maging okay po yung ating situation. So very iterative po lahat ng situations kasi natin ngayon. So that's the most that we can do sa ngayon po. All right. Just one last question from the chat group or YouTube. With regards naman po, I think this is a concern regarding the topic of Ma'am Au. Doon sa si Ma'am Au nga ba yun? Sa honor agreement po ba yan? Or something like that po. Parang kasi may sinasay po sila, hindi po ba ito in conflict sa pledge as sa existing child protection policy? May sinasabi po sila, may mention po sila na child protection policy. So hindi po ba yung pagpapasign ng pledge of honesty ay in conflict with that?
Yeah, I think sa akin po kasi applicable po siya sa college students, hindi po sa elementary.
I see. Opo. Ayun. So, dapat tingnan po natin siguro yung provisions noong policy kung meron tayong ma-violate or what. So, ayun po. But clearly, from the message of everyone, from our resource speaker, it looks like talagang hindi 100% ang ang prevention ng cheating.
Opo.
So yun. And I think parents will also have a role para i-ensure na, anak, siguro dapat you work this on your own. Avoid natin as much as possible to do cheating. So yun po siguro yung mga roles ng ating mga parents. Alright, so marami pa po actually na. So thank you very much. Okay, so I think Ma'am Daang, marami pa tayong tanong, but I think we really need to cut this webinar already. So maraming salamat po sa lahat ng nag-participate. We have the records of all the comments and the questions in the group Zoom group chat. We can forward them to our speakers para masagot nila. Siguro pwedeng yung pagsagot ay through the PhilSci-Hub page.
Yep.
Okay, pwede siguro nating i-type doon yung sagot or feedback from our speakers. Okay, maraming salamat po. So let's give the floor back to our very gorgeous host, Dr. Israel.
You're muted.
Yes, ayan naman. So, napaka-heated ng ating mga discussions at tayo napasarap at tayo lumampas na sa ating tinakdang oras, but alam kong marami sa inyo ay talagang na-appreciate itong aming webinar. So, next slide, Joseph.
Ayan na.
Ayan. So, to close our program, okay, ay ang ating dear founder ng Filipino Science Hub na na-feature ang ating Filipino Science Hub sa GMA News Online. Tignan nyo yan sa page ng PhilSci-Hub at pati ang marami pang ibang pages ang nag-feature ng Filipino Science Hub. So let's hear from Dr. Jeffrey C. Bungkin. Jeff?
Salamat, Ma'am Katsi. If I may, I will share my screen kasi before we close this, magpo-promote lang po kami ng upcoming events namin. Please bear with me. Nakikita nyo na po yung screen? How do I do this? Sorry po, ako yung nawawala. Okay, so bali before po kami mag-close, gusto ko lang pong magpasalamat sa ating mga resource speaker. So for the information po ng ating mga participants, so umabot po tayo ng 550 live participants over the past 3 hours. This took a month in the making po, or a bit like more, a little longer than a month, kasi po yung ating pong 5 resource speakers, they took their time to really plan for a fairly holistic webinar. So from definition po ng assessments, accessibility, traditional forms of assessment, alternative forms of assessment, and then integrity of assessment. So kung makikita po ninyo, sinubukan po namin i-cover yung lahat ng aspetong yun para matulungan po kayong maghanda sa pagbubukas po ng ating school year. So yun po. So una po, sana po pasalamatan po natin ng sabay-sabay sila kasi they put in so much work and energy and time, and makikita nyo po yung passion na inilagay po nila sa webinar na ito. So sana po ay pagbigyan po nila uli kami sa KKP at sa PhilSci-Hub para kapag po hindi na sila masyadong busy, madagdagan pa po namin or maayudahan pa po namin kung ano po yung aming inihandog sa inyo ngayong araw na ito. Ngayon po, so since medyo magiging busy rin na po sila sa pagtuturo po ngayong semester, medyo mag-switch gears po muna tayo sa PhilSci-Hub. So sa September 8 po, ichinempo po namin ito na holiday. We will be having our first we'll be having our first research webinar. And simula kami sa unang step. So how do we generate or how do we formulate research ideas? And yung approach po namin dito is we'll come up with a webinar that will course you through the steps, the strategies, best practices, and the things that we should avoid doing whenever we are formulating research Yeah, so meron po tayong resource speaker dyan, si Marty Mateo, who will go over, like some tips, and who will share some of his practical knowledge in developing research ideas at the high school level. We also have JP Onya, who's currently taking up his doctorate degree in Finland para mag-share naman po ng strategy college level. And then ako naman po, from my end, kung ito pong nakaraang 4 na buwan, nakikita niyo po lagi ako nagle-lecture, lagi po akong nagbibigay ng chemistry tutor. So this time around po, ang akin pong ipipresent sa inyo ay ang totoo ko pong specialization, which is research. So I will be sharing some of the usual biases, some of the best practices for developing research topics in general. So ito po, this is a very this webinar will be made to cater to both students and teachers. So we highly encourage you po to invite your students to participate in this event. And then also in this event, we will also be launching a program. So we call this Lion Team. So kung aware po kayo dun sa Shark Tank, we will be holding this online competition among teachers and po na ito ay para sa science research ideas. So ano man po yung over the next 3 months, webinars na ibigay namin sa inyo, okay. Balik na po ba?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so kung ano man po yung webinar na ibibigay namin over the next 3 months about science research, ultimately this will culminate in December po. So mag-iimbita kami kayo po, inimbitahan namin kayo mag-participate dito. This is a battle of science research ideas. At sinabi po natin Lions din, may mga ipapakilala po kaming leon sa inyo. Yun po mga manggigisa sa inyo at magbe-mentor at the same time pagdating sa science research. So this is open to all schools po at the high school level. So we highly encourage you to participate. At yun po. So hindi ko na po ito masyadong pahahabain kasi po medyo na-cover, nasakop na po namin ang inyong pananghalian. So muli po, maraming salamat po sa inyong pagtutok. Yun pong link para sa Google form para sa inyong certificate ay ipopost po namin sa YouTube channel comment box and dito sa YouTube, dito sa Zoom chat box. And then also, pagpo-post po ang KKP ng instructions sa kung paano po ninyo ma-claim ang inyong certificate. So if pumunta din po kayo sa KKP page, i-follow nyo po sila doon. Magpo-post din po kami ng instructions sa PhilSci Hub. Maraming salamat po. And isa lang po, babatiin ko lang po. Nakita ko kasi si Ma'am Heidi Hernandez. So she was answering some questions on YouTube. So Ma'am, hi, I miss you. Ayun po. So muli po, maraming salamat po sa inyo lahat at maraming salamat po sa ating mga speakers.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff, Yan. And so, eto na po, ang tagal nating hinihintay. Ang dami nagko-comment na kanina. So, ang evaluation form and certificate of participation, the link for the evaluation form will be posted in the FB page of KKP-ST. Accomplish the evaluation form via Google Forms. And take note, the link will only be active for 24 hours. Nawala ang slide, Joseph. Ayan. Ayan. So, 24 hours lang po. So, starting 12 noon today hanggang 12 noon bukas. Okay? Certificate of participation will be sent through email within 7 days. Mag-antay lang po kayo kasi medyo ang dami po nating participants. So, please like the KKP-ST Facebook page to get updates for future seminars and other activities. Ayan, maraming salamat po muli mula sa KKP at sa Filipino Science Hub. Nagpapasalamat po kami sa aming mga napakahuhusay na speakers ngayong araw na to. At syempre, walang success kung walang manonood. So maraming salamat po sa lahat ng nanood, nag-participate sa ating webinar. And with that, stay safe. God bless everyone. Bye!
Ay, sa speakers po, tsaka yung KKP, may debrief po tayo sa iba-iba pong session. We sent the link. Maraming salamat po ulit.
Bye-bye!
Huwag niyo muna itong i-out. Baka hindi pa nakokopya yung link.
Actually, i-post ko pa lang. Saglit lang.
Okay.
Resend ulit. Okay, thank you.